Hey there, story lovers. This is N.O. Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Harry discovered secret Potter vault at age 8 and found marriage contracts to 5 noble houses? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Owl That Wouldn't Leave the Dursleys had a rule about Harry being inside by 5 o'clock. It wasn't written down anywhere. It didn't need to be. Like most of the rules governing Harry's life at number 4, Privet Drive, it existed in the space between Aunt Petunia's pursed lips and Uncle Vernon's reddening neck, communicated through the particular way the lock clicked when they decided he'd been outside long enough. Sometimes it was 4:30. Sometimes it was 3. The clock on it depended entirely on Dudley's mood and whether anyone on the street might be watching. Today, the lock had clicked at 2:30. Harry had been sitting on the front step eating an apple, one of the small, slightly soft ones from the back of the fruit bowl that Petunia wouldn't touch, when he heard the deadbolt turn. He tried the handle anyway, just to be sure, and got the specific, hollow resistance that meant it was locked from the inside. Through the frosted glass panel he could see the blurred shape of his aunt moving away down the hall without looking back. He sat with it for a moment. Then he finished the apple, set the core neatly beside the step, and walked away down the street. This was not unusual. What was unusual was how far he walked. Normally Harry stayed within a few blocks: Magnolia Crescent, the park with the broken swings, the little public garden where the retired men played chess on Saturday mornings. He knew the geography of his allowed radius the way a dog knows the length of its chain, not because anyone had told him where the boundary was but because he'd found it through trial and error, through the particular look on Petunia's face when he came back having been gone too long, through the time Vernon had driven slowly alongside him on Wisteria Walk with the window down, saying nothing, just watching until Harry turned around. But today Harry walked past Magnolia Crescent without slowing down. He wasn't angry. That was the thing people always assumed about him, that the quiet was suppressed fury, that there was something hot and explosive underneath waiting to come out. There wasn't. Or if there was, Harry had never found it. What he had instead was a kind of careful watchfulness, a habit of noticing things and filing them away, a preference for understanding situations over reacting to them. The Dursleys had given him that much, at least. You learned to pay attention when you lived in a house where the rules changed without notice. He walked for nearly 40 minutes, following no particular direction, before he noticed the owl. It was a tawny owl, medium-sized, sitting on top of a postbox on the corner of a street he didn't recognize. That was odd on its own. Owls weren't daytime creatures, and this one was sitting in full afternoon sun as though it had been there a while and intended to stay. But what made Harry slow his pace was the way it looked at him. Not the idle curiosity of a bird watching movement. Direct. Specific. The way someone looks at a person they've been waiting for. He stopped. The owl blinked. Then it lifted its right talon and held it out, and Harry saw the small scroll of parchment tied to its leg with a red cord. He'd never received a letter in his life. The Dursleys got the post, sorted it in the kitchen, and that was that. No one wrote to Harry. He didn't have anyone to write to him. He walked slowly to the postbox, watching the owl the whole time, and when he was close enough the owl extended its leg patiently, like a well-trained creature that had done this 10,000 times and was simply waiting for the human to catch up. Harry untied the red cord. The scroll was heavier than it looked, real parchment with a textured surface, sealed with dark green wax impressed with a crest he didn't recognize, a key and a sword crossing over what looked like a mountain, or possibly a pile of coins. He broke the seal. The scroll unrolled to about 6 inches of dense, formal writing. To Mr. Harry James Potter, heir of the noble and most ancient house of Potter, greetings. This office has attempted to contact you on 14 previous occasions through standard owl post. Our communications have been intercepted or redirected on each occasion. We have therefore dispatched a certified Gringotts courier owl, which is magically compelled to locate its recipient regardless of interference, and which cannot be redirected by third-party charms. You are hereby notified that you have been listed as primary heir and sole executor of the Potter family estate since the age of 17 months. Due to extenuating legal circumstances, a provision was included in your father's will allowing early access to the Potter legacy vault at the sole discretion of the vault's appointed guardian, Mr. Ragnack of Gringotts Bank, London, should the heir demonstrate sufficient reason. We are of the opinion that 14 intercepted letters constitute sufficient reason. Should you wish to visit this office, you will find us at Wyvern Lane, which connects to the eastern end of Diagon Alley. Ask any owl. Faithfully, Grip Hook and Associates, Wizarding Solicitors licensed by Gringotts Bank. Harry read it twice. Then he looked at the owl, which was watching him with the expression of a creature that had completed its job and was waiting to see what came next. How do I get to Diagon Alley? He asked. The owl clicked its beak once, spread its wings, and flew in a slow, deliberate circle around Harry's head before heading south. Harry followed it. Getting into the leaky cauldron was easier than it should have been for an 8-year-old boy in a too large t-shirt with his cousin's name written inside the collar. The door simply opened when Harry pushed it, and the man behind the bar, old, hunch-shouldered, nearly blind by the look of him, said, passing through, "Are you?" without looking up from the glass he was polishing, in a tone that suggested children arrived alone all the time and it was no business of his. The owl waited on a coat hook by the back door. The brick wall moved when Harry pushed the right one. He'd watched the owl tap it twice with its beak and then stare at him with what could only be described as pointed patience, and then Diagon Alley opened in front of him like a secret that had been kept badly. Harry stopped walking. He'd been prepared, in some abstract way, for something unusual. The letter had said magic without saying the word, and Harry had spent 8 years filing away evidence of things that happened around him that had no ordinary explanation, the time he'd ended up on the school roof to escape Dudley's gang, the time his hair had grown back overnight after Petunia cut it, the time a boa constrictor at the zoo had turned to look at him like they were having a conversation. He'd known, the way you sometimes know things you can't prove yet, that there was a category of experience that didn't belong to the Dursleys' world. But knowing it abstractly and walking into a cobblestone street where a witch was haggling over a cauldron while a small dragon snapped at her robes from behind a reinforced cage was a different thing entirely. He stood in the entrance for about 10 seconds. Then he stepped forward, because the owl was already moving ahead of him and he had no intention of losing it. Wyvern Lane was exactly where the letter said it was, a narrow turning off the eastern end of Diagon Alley, easy to miss if you weren't looking, marked with a small bronze plaque that said Wyvern Lane, Professional Services in letters that seemed to rearrange themselves slightly when you looked away. The owl landed on a sign above a door that read Grip Hook and Associates and then flew off without ceremony, its job apparently complete. Harry pushed the door open. The office inside was small and well organized, which surprised him. He'd half expected something dusty and ancient, scrolls piled to the ceiling, ink-stained everything. Instead it was clean and efficient, with 3 desks arranged in a neat row, low-backed chairs for waiting, and walls lined with locked cabinets whose keyholes were all slightly too small for normal keys. Behind the middle desk sat a goblin. Harry recognized the species from the letter's affiliation, though he'd never seen one in person, who was perhaps 2/3 Harry's height with long, clever fingers and eyes the color of polished bronze. The goblin looked up, looked at Harry for a long moment, and said, "You are shorter than the portrait." "What portrait?" Harry said. "The one in Vault 1077. The goblin stood, and Harry noticed he moved with the contained efficiency of someone who never wasted motion. "I am Ragnock." "Not Ragnack," the letter had a typo, which I have documented. "You are Harry James Potter." It wasn't a question. Harry answered it anyway. "Yes." "You came alone." The owl didn't wait for me to find company. Something shifted in Ragnock's expression, not quite a smile, but an adjustment in the quality of his attention, like a scale that had just registered unexpected weight on one side. "Sit down, Mr. Potter. We have a great deal to discuss, and I would prefer to assess your comprehension before we proceed to the vault." Harry sat. "What do you need to assess?" "Whether you are the sort of person who will faint when confronted with large numbers." Ragnar opened a thick leather folder. Some people do. It is not useful. I won't faint. We shall see. Ragnar set the folder on the desk between them, open to the first page. The Potter estate as of today consists of 4 vaults at Gringotts, 2 properties in Britain, 1 property in France, controlling interest in 7 wizarding businesses, and investment portfolios in both the wizarding and Muggle financial systems. The total estimated value in Muggle sterling is, he named a number. Harry did not faint. He did go very still, which Ragnar noted with what appeared to be professional satisfaction. The primary vault, Vault 687, the one most people know about, contains a modest fund set aside specifically for your education and living expenses, Ragnar continued. The Legacy Vault, Vault 1077, has been sealed since your father's death. It contains property deeds, investment records, the Potter family grimoire, correspondence, personal effects, and a collection of sealed documents your father specified were to be opened by the heir upon first access. He paused. There is also a collection of contracts. The letter mentioned contracts, Harry said. Marriage contracts, Ragnar said, watching him carefully. 5 of them. Signed by your father on your behalf before your first birthday, in accordance with old wizarding law. Each one binds you to a child of a noble and most ancient house. The contracts are conditional and time-limited. They require confirmation by both parties before your 17th birthday, and they can be dissolved by either party with appropriate legal procedure. They are not shackles, Mr. Potter. They are options. But they are legal options, and the families involved are aware of them. Harry absorbed this. Which families? Ragnar listed them. Harry filed each name away carefully, in the way he filed everything, not panicking, not rejecting it, just setting it in a mental row where he could look at it from different angles. Why did my father sign 5? Wouldn't one be enough? Your father was a strategist, Ragnar said, and for the first time there was something that sounded almost like approval in his voice. He signed contracts with houses whose political alignment, when combined, would constitute a majority bloc on the Wizengamot. 5 houses, 5 votes, all of them linked to yours. As your alliances, they become your votes. He closed the folder. In short, your father did not simply leave you money. He left you a position. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside, Harry could hear the muffled noise of Diagon Alley, someone arguing about a price, a child crying, the distant clang of a forge. Can I see the vault? Harry asked. Gringotts Bank was everything the little office was not, vast, echoing, with a ceiling that vanished into shadow and a floor of pale marble veined with gold that caught the light in moving patterns. The goblins behind the long counter moved with the same contained efficiency as Ragnar, and several of them glanced at Harry as Ragnar walked him through, with expressions that were hard to read. Not unfriendly. More like professional curiosity about a variable that had finally resolved itself. The cart ride to Vault 1077 was longer than Harry expected, corkscrewing deep into the earth on tracks that glowed faintly blue in the dark, passing sealed doors carved with runes that pulsed with contained light. Harry held the edge of the cart with both hands and watched the walls go past and said nothing, because the nothing felt right. It was the kind of silence you kept when you understood that something important was happening and talking would only dilute it. Ragnar spoke once during the descent, without looking at him. Your father was a good client. Prompt in his correspondence, clear in his instructions, honest about his uncertainties. He updated the vault specifications 3 times in the year before his death. He knew he might die, Harry said. He knew Voldemort was trying to kill him. Yes. The cart stopped. Vault 1077 had no number visible on the door. Instead, the stone around the frame was carved with a dense pattern of interlocking vines and small angular symbols, runes, Harry would later learn, but for now they were just patterns that seemed to breathe slightly when he looked at them directly. The door itself was black iron, and set into the center of it was a handprint slightly larger than Harry's, glowing a dim, warm amber. The vault responds to Potter blood, Ragnar said. Put your hand against the print. Harry pressed his palm flat to the iron. The cold of it hit him first, a deep, bone-level cold that ran up his arm and into his chest, and then the amber light brightened sharply, shifting to gold, and Harry felt something he had no word for, a recognition that moved through him like a current, as though the vault had been waiting for this specific moment and was expressing, in whatever way old magic could express things, that it was glad he'd come. The door swung open. The room beyond was larger than it had any right to be. This was magic, Harry reminded himself. Normal rules didn't apply. The space was perhaps the size of a large living room, stone-walled, lit by a warm golden light that came from nowhere specific, with shelves along 3 walls and in the center a low, heavy table made of dark wood. On the shelves were boxes, folders, rolled parchments in labeled cases, small locked chests, objects wrapped in cloth. Everything organized. Everything labeled in the same precise, slightly slanted handwriting. His father's handwriting, he realized. He'd never seen it before. He recognized it anyway, in some deep, wordless way. It looked like what he imagined James Potter to have looked like, energetic and purposeful with occasional moments of careful precision. On the center table, set apart from everything else, were 3 items. A large, leather-bound book with a Potter family crest embossed on the cover. A rolled parchment sealed with the same green wax as the letter that had found him today. And a small framed photograph. Harry went to the photograph first. 2 people, a man and a woman, standing in front of a house he didn't recognize, laughing at something off-camera. The man had Harry's exact hair, the same hopeless dark chaos, and his mother's eyes were the thing people always said about him, "You have your mother's eyes," and now he understood what they meant because looking at Lily Potter's face was like looking at his own eyes in a mirror, that specific shade of green that he'd never seen on anyone else. They were both young. They were both moving in the photograph, caught in a moment of ordinary happiness, and they had no idea what was coming. Harry set the photograph down carefully. He opened the sealed parchment next. Harry, if you're reading this, you found the vault. You found it early, which means something went wrong, not just with Voldemort, which we knew was coming, but with whatever arrangements we made for you. So things didn't go the way we hoped. I'm sorry about that. I want to tell you everything, but your mother pointed out that if I try to write everything down, I'll write a novel, and what you actually need right now is probably more practical. So. The practical things, the grimoire on the table is the Potter family spellbook. It goes back 11 generations. Some of it is historical, some is theoretical, and the last 3 chapters are spells I wrote or modified myself. Your mother helped with most of the theory. The protective enchantments alone are worth the read. Start there if you want to understand what I was trying to build for you. The contracts in the brown folder on the second shelf are the marriage contracts. I know that sounds strange. I need you to understand why I did it. When Voldemort rose, he didn't just kill people. He systematically destroyed alliances. He drove wedges between old families, isolated moderates, made neutrality feel like the only safe choice. When he was gone, and I believed he would be gone, one way or another, the wizarding world was going to need to be rebuilt. I signed those contracts because the 5 houses involved represent 5 different centers of political gravity in the wizarding world. Together, they would create something none of them could create alone. A coalition stable enough to hold. I signed them for you, but I want to be clear, they are not obligations. They are gifts. Each of those families has a child roughly your age who may become one of the most important people in your life, or may become simply an ally, or may choose to dissolve the contract entirely. That is their right and yours. What I've given you is an introduction, not a sentence. There are other documents in the vault. Wills, deeds, investment instructions, a full accounting of what we had and where it went. Ragnarok will help you understand whatever you don't. One last thing. There is a sealed document at the back of the brown folder, behind the contracts. It concerns your godfather, Sirius Black. Read it carefully. What happened to him was not right, and if anyone can correct it, it might be you. We loved you. Present tense. That's the only thing about this letter that isn't practical, but it's the one thing I most need you to know. James Harry read the letter twice, sitting on the edge of the table in the warm golden light of the vault, and when he was done he folded it carefully along its original creases and held it in both hands for a moment. He wasn't crying. He was doing the thing he'd learned to do with big things, turning them over slowly in his mind, finding the edges, understanding the shape of them before deciding what to do. Then he reached for the grimoire. He stayed in the vault for 3 hours. Ragnarok waited outside without complaint, which Harry suspected was a professional courtesy extended specifically because of who he was and who his father had been. Inside, Harry read with the focused intensity that had always been his best quality, the one the Dursleys had never managed to extinguish, the one that had gotten him through 4 different primary schools at which he was expected to fail and had instead, quietly, and without making a fuss about it, come top of his class in every subject except the ones where teachers had called the Dursleys about it and Petunia had arranged for the marks to be quietly revised downward. The grimoire opened like a conversation with someone who had been expecting him. The first section was historical, generations of Potters, their accomplishments and magical specializations, written in different hands across centuries. The Potters were not the oldest family in Britain, but they were consistent. Every generation produced at least one genuinely exceptional practitioner, and the family magic had a specific character that recurred, adaptive, intuitive, strongest under pressure, deeply tied to intent. The Potter gift, one ancestor had written, is not power in the conventional sense. It is clarity. We see what needs doing and we do it. This has gotten us into a great deal of trouble historically, but it has also saved a considerable number of lives. The protective enchantment section was dense and technical, but Harry worked through it methodically, reading it twice when he didn't understand the first time, which was often. What emerged from the density was a picture of his father as a magical theorist of genuine ability, someone who thought about magic structurally, who understood it the way an architect understood load-bearing walls, who could see how one piece connected to another. The last section, the spells James had written himself, was where Harry stopped moving and simply read, because these were the most personal, full of small marginalia in his father's handwriting, questions and observations and one note that simply said Lily disagrees with the wand angle on this one and she is probably right, see her notes on page 207. Page 207 was in a different hand, smaller and more precise, and explained a modification to the wand movement that made the spell significantly more efficient. At the bottom of the page, in James's handwriting again, she was right. She is always right. I have stopped being surprised by this. Harry found that he was smiling. He closed the grimoire and went to the brown folder. The 5 contracts were each on a single sheet of heavy cream parchment, dense with legal language that he read carefully even when he didn't understand all of it. The structure became clear quickly, each contract named a family, named a child, specified terms of engagement and conditions of dissolution, and included a rider section that detailed what each house brought to the alliance. His father had been thorough. Reading the riders was like reading a strategic document, he could see exactly how the pieces were meant to fit. Longbottom, old land, old magic, military heritage. Greengrass, financial holdings, political connections in continental Europe, social influence in the neutral bloc. Bones, law enforcement, judicial access, ministry standing. Abbott, agricultural holdings, Hufflepuff network, quiet but enormous influence over trade guild voting. Black, oldest magic in Britain, Wisengamot seats, and what the contract called irreplaceable ancestral resources that were not further specified. 5 houses. 5 different kinds of power. And at the center of all of it, a position for the House of Potter that wasn't just wealthy but structurally necessary, the keystone that made the arch hold. Harry set the contracts down. Then he reached for the sealed document at the back of the folder. It was thicker than the others, sealed with red wax instead of green, and stamped along the edge with a Gringotts authentication mark. He broke the seal. What was inside was a legal brief. Dense, precise, annotated in 3 different hands, his father's, his mother's, and a third he didn't recognize that later turned out to be the previous senior partner at Grip Hook and Associates. The brief laid out, in exhaustive and well-sourced detail, the circumstances surrounding the arrest and imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black. Harry read it once quickly, just for the shape of it. Then he read it again slowly. When he was done, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he picked up all the documents, stacked them carefully, placed the photograph on top, and carried them to the vault door. "Ragnarok," he said. "I need to understand the wizarding legal system." The goblin looked at him with those bronze eyes. "That is a large subject." "I know. Can we start today?" Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment, assessing, not dismissive. Then he stepped back from the vault door and gestured toward the cart. "Come. We will use my office. I have files." Harry didn't leave Gringotts until nearly 7 in the evening. By the time he walked back through the leaky cauldron and found his way to a payphone, using coins from the small change purse Ragnarok had pressed into his hand with the air of someone solving a logistical problem, he'd had 2 hours of dense education in wizarding law and governance, eaten a sandwich that appeared without explanation around 4 o'clock, and come away with a short list of things he needed to do and a longer list of things he needed to understand before he could do them. The list was organized in his mind by priority, the way his mind always organized things. Top priority: establish a legal representative empowered to act on his behalf, since he was 8 and couldn't sign contracts himself. Second priority: get the Potter Vault 687 access card that would let him actually buy things, because Ragnarok had been clear that he couldn't simply transfer funds to Muggle accounts without jumping through considerable procedural hoops, but he could have a spending account in Diagon Alley. Third priority: read the rest of the grimoire. Fourth priority, and this one was circled in his mental list with something brighter than urgency, more like a cold, clear anger wearing patience as a coat, Sirius Black. He called the Dursleys from the payphone. Aunt Petunia answered on the third ring. "It's me," Harry said. "I'm going to be late." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" "I found something interesting. I'll explain when I get home." "You'll explain now, young man, Aunt Petunia," Harry said, in the calm, level tone that he had discovered worked better on her than any argument or pleading. "I'll be home in an hour. Everything is fine." He hung up. He stood for a moment with his hand still on the receiver, looking down the street toward the distant shimmer of Diagon Alley, and thought about a man sitting in a prison he'd been put in without a trial, for a crime the documents in Harry's arms made clear he hadn't committed. Then he started walking, because standing still wasn't useful. He was home by 8, which was not an hour but was better than he'd managed to suggest it might be. The front door was unlocked, which meant Petunia had left it unlocked for him, which meant she'd been worried, which Harry filed away as a data point about his aunt that didn't fit her usual pattern and was therefore interesting. He came in quietly, set the grimoire and the documents on the floor of the cupboard under the stairs, and went to the kitchen, where Petunia was sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and Vernon was at the other end reading the paper with the focused intensity of a man who was pretending not to be listening. "Sit down," Petunia said. Harry sat. She looked at him for a long moment. Petunia Dursley was not a warm woman, and she was not kind to Harry in any way that would bear examination, but she was intelligent, and sometimes when she looked at him there was something in her face that wasn't the usual tight dismissal. Something older and more complicated. "Where were you?" she said. "I found a letter," Harry said. "It was from, there are things about my parents that I didn't know. I went to find out about them." He paused, choosing the next words carefully. "I won't be doing it often. And I was safe. Things about your parents." Petunia's mouth pressed into a thin line. "What sort of things?" "Financial things," Harry said, which was technically true. "Legal things." Petunia stared at him. Then she looked away, at the wall, at the cheerful rooster print curtains over the sink, at nothing in particular, and Harry watched the complicated thing move behind her eyes. "You are 8 years old," she said finally, in a voice that was less sharp than usual. More tired. I know. This sort of thing. She stopped. Started again. Your mother got involved in things she shouldn't have. At your age. Earlier. She always thought she could manage things that were too large for her. She managed pretty well, Harry said quietly. From what I read. Petunia's head turned back to him. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, and for a moment Harry felt the odd sensation of being seen clearly by his aunt, which almost never happened, and which was more uncomfortable than her usual blank dismissal. You're too like her, Petunia said, and it didn't sound like a criticism, exactly. Go to bed. Harry went. In the cupboard under the stairs, in the dark, he lay on his narrow cot with the grimoire resting against his chest and stared at the underside of the stairs above him. The wood was close enough that he could trace the knots in it by memory. He'd been doing that since he could remember. He thought about what Ragnarok had told him about the Wizengamot. About what his father's letter had said about rebuilding. About a man in Azkaban who had never had a trial. He thought about walking into Diagon Alley today, about the way the magical world had simply opened for him like something that had been waiting, not with fanfare, not with drama, but with the quiet rightness of a key fitting a lock. He wasn't afraid. He thought he probably should be, or at least should feel more overwhelmed than he did. But the predominant sensation was something more like relief, the specific relief of a person who has spent a long time in a cramped space discovering that the wall they'd been pressing against was actually a door. He opened the grimoire to the first page of his father's personal notes and read by the thin slant of light that came under the cupboard door from the hall, and the words felt less like history and more like instructions. He read until midnight. When he finally slept, his dreams were not of Privet Drive. They were of vaults and parchment and 5 names written in his father's precise hand, and a sense, deep and unshakable, that things were about to change in ways that were going to be significantly more interesting than anyone expected. Including, Harry thought, himself. In the morning he was up before 5, before Petunia, before Vernon's alarm, moving quietly through the kitchen to make his own tea. He sat at the table with the legal brief on Sirius Black spread in front of him and read it a third time, making small notes in the margins with a pencil stub he'd found behind the bread bin. The core of it was simple. Underneath the legal language, Sirius Black had been James Potter's best friend and secret keeper, except that at the last minute, James had switched, putting the secret keeping onto another man, Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew had been the one who betrayed them. When Sirius caught up with him, Pettigrew had faked his own death, killed 12 muggles with a single curse, and escaped in the chaos, leaving Sirius surrounded by bodies and looking guilty. And no one had asked Sirius for his side. No trial. No Veritaserum. No formal examination of the evidence. They'd simply put him in Azkaban and moved on, because the war was over and they wanted it to stay that way. Harry wrote in the margin, Pettigrew equals alive. Where? And below that, who benefits from Sirius staying in Azkaban? And below that, Ragnarok said the Wizengamot can call for prisoner review. What does that take? He was still writing when Petunia came downstairs, stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at the papers spread across her kitchen table, and pressed her lips together so hard they disappeared. Breakfast, she said, after a moment that lasted slightly longer than was comfortable. I'll make it, Harry said, without looking up. Eggs? Another pause. Yes, Petunia said, in the voice of a woman who had decided to deal with something later. Harry got up and made the eggs. Outside, the summer morning was pulling itself together in the grey English way, clouds moving east with slow purpose, the streets still empty except for a milk float and someone's cat sitting on a wall with elaborate indifference to the world. Harry cooked and thought and ate his breakfast while the legal brief sat beside his plate, and he made a list in his head of everything he needed to do before he could go back to Gringotts. The list was long. He was fine with that. 3 weeks later, Harry Potter walked back into Grip Hook and Associates with a leather satchel over one shoulder, found at a charity shop for 50 pence, containing the full portfolio of his father's documents, a notebook filled with questions organized by category, and the grimoire, which he was carrying everywhere now and had read front to back twice. His hair was still impossible. His glasses were still held together with tape on the left arm. He was still wearing clothes that were technically Dudley's. But he sat across from Ragnarok with the specific composure of someone who has spent 3 weeks understanding a problem and has arrived with something to say about it. "I've been thinking about the Wisengamot petition," Harry said. "For Sirius Black." Ragnarok folded his hands. "Have you?" "The petition requires a sitting Wisengamot member to file it. I have a hereditary seat through the House of Potter, but I can't take it myself until I'm 17. However," Harry opened his notebook to the relevant page, "a proxy can hold the seat on my behalf, and the proxy has all the voting and filing rights of the seat holder." "Correct," Ragnarok said. "So I need to appoint a proxy." Harry looked up. Would Gringotts accept this appointment? The bronze eyes were very still. "You are asking a goblin to hold a wizarding Wisengamot seat on your behalf. You'd be acting as my legal representative, not as yourself. The seat would still be Potter's. You'd just be the voice." Harry paused. "Unless there's a legal reason it wouldn't work." There was a long silence. "There is no precedent," Ragnarok said slowly. "Is there a law against it?" An even longer silence. "No," Ragnarok said. "There is not." "Then it's worth filing," Harry said. "The worst they can do is say no, and then we'd know for certain." Something moved in Ragnarok's expression that Harry was starting to recognize, that adjustment on the scale, the recalibration. The goblin looked at him for a long moment with something that might, in another species, have been respect. "I will have the paperwork drafted," Ragnarok said. "Come back Thursday." Harry nodded and made a note in his notebook. "I also need to start contacting the 5 houses. The contracts say there's a formal etiquette for the initial approach." "There is." "The introductory letter is sent from the heir to the family head, through official channels, acknowledging the contract and requesting a meeting. Gringotts can send those on your behalf. Let's draft those too." Harry turned to a new page in his notebook. "Tell me the right form for the Longbottom letter first. I want to get those right." Outside, Diagon Alley was going about its morning business, entirely unaware that in a small, efficient office on Wyvern Lane, an 8-year-old boy was methodically and without any fuss at all beginning to reassemble a legacy that half the wizarding world had assumed was finished. He had no idea, yet, how many people were going to be surprised by that. He was going to find out very soon. Chapter 2, 5 names on parchment. The letters went out on a Tuesday. Ragnarok sent them by certified Gringotts owl, the same kind that had found Harry 3 weeks ago, the kind that couldn't be redirected, and each one was sealed with the Potter family crest in green wax and written in formal wizarding etiquette that Ragnarok had dictated and Harry had copied 3 times until the phrasing felt right. Not stiff. Not aggressive. Just clear. "I am aware of the contract. I would like to meet. Here is when I am available." Harry had debated the last part for 20 minutes. "You're 8, Ragnarok had said, with the air of someone stating a fact rather than a limitation. "The families will want to assess you. Giving them a choice of meeting times communicates confidence without aggression. What if they don't respond?" "They will respond. 3 of the 5 families have been waiting for this letter since you were 18 months old. The other 2 will respond out of sheer curiosity." "Which 2? Greengrass and Black?" Ragnarok had paused. "The Greengrasses are cautious. They signed the contract because your father was persuasive and the political logic was sound, but they have spent 11 years wondering if the investment was wise. They will want to see you before they decide anything." "And Black?" Something complicated had moved across Ragnarok's face. "The Black family situation is not straightforward. The family head is currently Narcissa Malfoy, née Black, as the other senior members are either dead or incarcerated. The contract was signed by Sirius Black on behalf of the family, not by the current head. There will be a legal question about standing." "I'll deal with that when we get there," Harry had said, which made Ragnarok look at him with that recalibrating expression again. The responses came back within 4 days, which Ragnarok said was fast, which meant all 5 families had been watching for exactly this letter and had pre-prepared their answers. Harry read them at the kitchen table at Privet Drive while Petunia made a point of cleaning things that were already clean in the vicinity of his papers and pretending not to look. Longbottom, we would be pleased to receive Mr. Potter at Longbottom Hall at his earliest convenience. Augusta Longbottom. Bones, please come for tea on Saturday. We're looking forward to meeting you. Amelia Bones. Abbott, yes, absolutely, this Saturday works, we'll do lunch. Hannah can't wait. Helena Abbott. P.S. Sorry about the exclamation points, my daughter is very excited. Greengrass, Mr. Potter. We will receive you on Sunday at 10 o'clock. Come alone. Cyrus Greengrass. Black, this matter is under legal review. Do not contact this office again. N. Malfoy. Harry read the black response twice, then set it aside. Ragnarok, he said, in his head, filing it under 4th priority, complicated, will require strategy. Then he wrote back to Longbottom, Bones, Abbott, and Greengrass, confirmed all 4 meetings, and went back to the grimoire. Longbottom Hall was first, on a Thursday afternoon. Getting there required a Floo connection from the leaky cauldron. Ragnarok had arranged for Harry to be given temporary access, and Harry's first experience with the Floo network was exactly as undignified as the instructions suggested it might be. He came out of the Longbottom Hall fireplace in a forward stumble, caught himself on a marble mantelpiece that was fortunately very sturdy, and straightened up to find a tall, sharp-faced woman in emerald green robes watching him from across the room with the expression of someone who had seen a great many things and was reserving judgment on this one. Mr. Potter, said Augusta Longbottom. Mrs. Longbottom, Harry said, brushing soot off his shoulder. Thank you for the invitation. She looked at him. It was a comprehensive look, the kind that started at the top and moved methodically downward, taking inventory. Harry stood still and let her do it, which seemed to be the right response because something in her expression shifted very slightly. You have your father's face, she said. Come and sit down. The sitting room was large and formal, old family portraits on the walls, heavy furniture that had been there for generations, a tea service already laid out with the precision of someone who took the ritual seriously. Harry sat in the chair she indicated, which was lower than hers, which he noted without reacting to, and accepted the cup she poured. My grandson is in the garden, Augusta said. He will join us shortly. I wanted to speak with you first. Of course, Harry said. How much do you know about the contract? She asked, direct, no preamble. Everything in the document, Harry said. I've read it several times. I understand the terms and the conditions of dissolution. And your thoughts? My father was thorough. Harry set down his cup. He thought about the political implications carefully. The Longbottom alliance specifically, your family's military history, your standing in the old family's network, the agricultural holdings in the Southwest. It's not a sentimental choice. It's a structural one. Augusta's eyebrow lifted a fraction. You speak of your father's choices very analytically for a boy who's just met his legacy. I've had 3 weeks with the documents, Harry said. And I liked what I read about him. That's not separate from the analysis. It's part of it. A longer pause. Augusta Longbottom looked at him the way Ragnarok looked at him, that adjusting quality, like something had come in at an unexpected weight. Then she set down her own cup and said, Neville, toward the garden door. The boy who came in was slightly chubby, sandy-haired, with a round face that currently wore an expression balanced exactly halfway between hope and terror. He was clutching a small plant pot against his chest like a shield, which Harry suspected was not deliberate but was very telling. Neville, Augusta said, this is Harry Potter. Neville looked at Harry. Harry looked at Neville. There was a brief, honest silence. Hi, Harry said. Hi, said Neville, in the voice of someone testing whether the ice would hold. Is that a Mimbulus Mimbletonia? Harry asked, nodding at the pot. Neville blinked. The hope-to-terror ratio shifted significantly toward hope. Yeah. How do you know what that is? The grimoire has a section on magical plants. Your family contributed some notes to an earlier edition, apparently. Harry paused. Do they really squirt when you poke them? Stink sap, Neville said, with the sudden enthusiasm of someone who has found the one topic that makes them forget to be nervous. It goes everywhere. Gran won't let me keep it in the house anymore. He came the rest of the way into the room and sat down across from Harry, setting the pot carefully on his knee. You actually read about magical plants? I read everything I could find. The grimoire's pretty comprehensive. It has herbology in it. 4 chapters. Your great-grandmother annotated one of them. Neville stared at him. Then, slowly, a grin broke over his round face, genuine and wide and completely unguarded, the kind of smile that belonged to a person without a single pretentious bone in their body. That's brilliant, he said. Augusta was watching them both with an expression Harry couldn't fully read but which didn't seem displeased. She refilled her tea without comment. They talked for 2 hours. Neville was not the nervous, fumbling boy his first entrance had suggested, or he was that, but he was also someone with a genuine passion for herbology that lit him up when he talked about it, someone with an unexpectedly dry sense of humor that he deployed quietly when he thought no one was watching, and someone with a careful, attentive quality that Harry recognized, because he had it too, the quality of a person who has learned to read rooms. They'd learned it for different reasons, Harry from survival, Neville from living in the shadow of expectations he sensed he couldn't meet, but the result was a similar kind of watchfulness that recognized itself in the other. Before Harry left, Augusta walked him back to the fireplace alone. The contract will stand, she said, with the finality of a woman who made decisions and did not revisit them. The Longbottom house acknowledges the agreement. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me yet. Her voice was dry. You have 4 more families to meet, and at least one of them is going to make this difficult. She said it with the certainty of someone who knew exactly which one she meant. Harry suspected he did too. One last thing, Augusta said, as he picked up the flu powder. My grandson has not had many friends. The contracts are political. What happens between you and Neville, that is personal. Don't conflate them. I won't, Harry said. He meant it entirely. He went through the flow, and behind him, Augusta Longbottom turned back to the room where Neville was still sitting with his plant pot, talking to it quietly, a habit she usually discouraged, and she did not, for once, tell him to stop. The Bones estate was in the countryside north of London, and Amelia Bones met Harry at the gate herself, which he later understood was unusual. She was a square-shouldered woman with a monocle and short grey-streaked hair, and she shook his hand with the no-nonsense grip of someone who had spent 20 years in law enforcement and considered proper handshakes a basic professional courtesy regardless of the age of the person involved. Harry Potter, she said, looking at him steadily. You look like your father. People keep saying that, Harry said. It's accurate. She turned and walked toward the house, expecting him to follow. You also have your mother's eyes. She was a remarkable witch. I know, Harry said. I've been reading about her. Amelia glanced back. Reading about her? She did modifications to the protective enchantments in the grimoire. The theory is impressive. She had a way of seeing how different spellwork interacted structurally. The annotations are clearer than the original text in some places. Amelia was quiet for a moment. You've had the vault for 3 weeks and you've read the whole grimoire. 3 times, Harry said. She made a short sound that might have been approval. Susan is inside. She's been wound up tight about this all week, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't do anything alarming in the first 5 minutes. What counts as alarming? She has a list, Amelia said. Most of it is unlikely. But she worries. They went inside. Susan Bones was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of pumpkin juice and what had clearly been a book until about 30 seconds ago when she'd put it down at an angle that suggested she'd heard them coming up the walk. She was a round-faced girl with warm strawberry blonde hair and brown eyes that were currently doing a very controlled version of the same inventory taking her aunt had done at the gate, except that Susan's version was less clinical and more searching. Like she was looking for something specific and wasn't sure she'd find it. "Hi," Harry said. "Hi," said Susan, steadily. Then, after a brief pause, "Do you want pumpkin juice? I can get you some. Please." She got up and poured him a glass, and the small domestic action seemed to settle something in her. The tension in her shoulders dropped slightly and she sat back down with the ease of someone who was good in social situations when given a clear role in them. They were left alone almost immediately. Amelia said she had correspondence to deal with and departed with the air of someone who had decided the best thing she could do was remove herself from the equation. Harry suspected she was listening from the next room, but the absence of adult supervision changed the atmosphere, and Susan seemed to know it. "This is weird," Susan said, about 10 minutes into the conversation. "Very," Harry agreed. "I've known about the contract since I was 6. She wrapped both hands around her glass. Aunt Amelia, I mean, she's my guardian, she prefers Aunt, she sat me down and explained it. She was very thorough. She explained the political context and the historical precedent and all the ways it could be dissolved." She looked at him. She was trying to make it less scary. "Did it work?" "Sort of. It mostly made it more complicated." Susan turned her glass in her hands. "She said your family was good. That your dad was a good man and your mum was brilliant. She was angry about what happened to them." A brief pause. "She was angry for a long time. She's still angry, but it's quieter now." Harry thought about the war. About what it had left behind, parents dead, children orphaned, old families broken apart, a world that had to be rebuilt by the people who'd survived it. He thought about Susan, 6 years old, being sat down at a kitchen table and given a careful explanation of a complicated inheritance. "Were you angry?" he asked. Susan looked at him, and the searching quality in her eyes found something, because the tension in her face released into something more honest. "Yes," she said. "I wanted to be angry at you, actually. Because it was easier to be angry at someone who was there. But you weren't there either, were you?" "No," Harry said. "We're in the same position, really. Someone made a decision for us before we could make it ourselves." Susan nodded slowly. Then she said, with the quiet directness of someone who had made up her mind, "I don't want to dissolve it. Just so you know. I think what your dad was trying to build was a good idea. Aunt Amelia thinks so too, even if she won't say it out loud." She paused. "But I'd like to actually know you. Not just be politically allied with you." "That seems like the right order," Harry said. She smiled, warm and genuine, a Susan Bones smile that Harry would later understand was one of the most reliable things in his life, because when Susan Bones smiled at you like that it meant you had done something that was straightforwardly good and she was acknowledging it simply, without agenda. "Okay," she said. "Do you play Exploding Snap?" "I don't know what that is." Susan's eyes lit up. "Oh, this is going to be fun." She got up to get the cards, and Harry sat at the Bones kitchen table in the afternoon sun, and thought that his father, for all the things that had gone wrong, had not been bad at picking families. The Abbott meeting was nothing like the first two. Helena Abbott met Harry at the door to a rambling, cheerful farmhouse west of Godric's Hollow and immediately offered him 3 different types of biscuit, said, "Don't mind the chickens," about a chicken that was inexplicably on the front step, and launched into an explanation of where Hannah was that involved 4 separate sub-stories and showed no sign of concluding. Harry stood in the doorway, accepted a biscuit, and followed the narrative as best he could. Hannah Abbott appeared from around the corner of the house wearing mud-caked boots and carrying a basket of something that might have been herbs, stopped when she saw Harry, looked at him for about 1 second, and said, "So you're real?" "Generally," Harry said. "Hannah," her mother said. This is Harry Potter. I know who he is, Mum, that's what I meant. I was starting to think he might be theoretical. Hannah set down her basket, pulled off her boots, leaving them on the step next to the chicken, which did not seem bothered, and gestured inside. Come on then. I'll put the kettle on. Hannah Abbott was, Harry discovered very quickly, entirely without pretense. She didn't do the careful inventory taking, didn't have prepared questions, didn't run the meeting like an interview. She put the kettle on, cut him a large piece of something she called treacle tart and he immediately agreed was the best thing he had ever tasted, and sat across from him at a kitchen table covered in gardening books and loose parchment and said, "Right, so, my dad explained the contract thing and I have thoughts." "Let's hear them," Harry said. "It's absurd," Hannah said, cheerfully. In a fine old wizarding tradition sort of way. Like, obviously it made sense politically, and obviously our families are all very impressive and serious about it, but the actual practical reality is that we're 8 and someone decided we'd get married before any of us could talk. That's objectively funny. It is, Harry agreed. Mum thinks I shouldn't lead with that. Your mum is probably right from a diplomatic standpoint. Yes, well, diplomacy. Hannah waved a hand. The thing is, and this is what I told Dad, if we're going to be part of this whole thing, I want it to actually work. Not just be a political arrangement that everyone tolerates. That sounds miserable. She looked at him directly. So. What are you actually like? Not the heir of Potter stuff. You. Harry thought about it. I read a lot. I like knowing how things work. I get very focused on problems I can't solve yet. He paused. I've been living with my Muggle relatives and they're not particularly kind. I've spent a lot of time on my own, so I'm good at that. But, he stopped. But? Hannah said. But I think I'd like not to be. Hannah looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, with the air of someone who has received a satisfactory answer to an important question. Okay, she said. You should know that I'm loud and I have a lot of opinions, and if you're planning on being the stoic silent type I'll probably find it irritating. I'm not stoic, Harry said. I'm just quiet until I have something worth saying. That's allowed, Hannah said. More tart. Yes please. Gran. Hannah called toward the garden. He's normal. You can come in. Harry looked at the doorway. An older woman appeared in it with her own cup of tea and the expression of someone who had been listening the whole time and was satisfied with what she'd heard. Sorry, Hannah said, not sounding particularly sorry. Gran doesn't trust first impressions so she prefers to lurk. Very sensible, Harry said, to the older woman, who laughed. He stayed for 3 hours. When he left, Hannah walked him to the edge of the property where the flu-connected stone pillar was, kicking through the long grass, talking about a book she was reading on herbological magic that intersected with something Neville had apparently written to her about after Augusta Longbottom had mentioned Harry's visit. Harry stored this detail, the 5 families were in communication, the meetings were being discussed, and filed it as a good sign. Last thing, Hannah said, at the pillar. Greengrass tomorrow? Sunday morning, Harry said. Hannah's expression did something complicated. Daphne is very smart, she said carefully. But she thinks being smart means she gets to decide how things go. Which, I mean, she's usually right, which is the annoying part. Hannah looked at him with the frank directness that was already becoming her signature. Don't let her put you in a box. What box? You'll know it when you see it, Hannah said. Just don't get in it. Harry thought about that on the flu ride home. Sunday morning arrived with the particular sharp clarity of an English summer day that had decided to be properly bright for once, and Harry put on the least bad of his clothes, a dark shirt that was only slightly too large, and fled from the leaky cauldron to the Greengrass estate at precisely 10 o'clock. The Greengrass manor was beautiful and knew it. Not showy, nothing as crude as showing off, but every element was precisely chosen and placed, the grey stone facade, the formal garden, the gravel drive raked to smooth perfection. It said we have been here a long time and we intend to be here considerably longer, and it said it quietly, which was somehow more impressive than shouting. Cyrus Greengrass met him in the entrance hall. He was a lean, composed man with sharp features and pale eyes, dressed in formal robes that he wore the way people wore clothes they'd been born in. He shook Harry's hand with a brief, measuring grip. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Punctual." "The letter specified 10 o'clock, Harry said. "My last 3 business associates were each between 15 and 20 minutes late." They considered it a power gesture. Cyrus Greengrass looked at him steadily. "I consider it rude." "So do I," Harry said. Something in the man's expression adjusted fractionally. He turned and led Harry into the house. "My wife will join us shortly. My daughter Daphne is in the library. She asked to meet you there." A brief pause. "She made this request after I told her you had read the Potter Grimoire 3 times in 3 weeks. Is the library a test?" Harry asked. "Everything with Daphne is a test," Cyrus said, without particular inflection, and Harry couldn't tell if this was a warning or simply a statement of observable fact. The library was on the 2nd floor, 2 rooms wide, with tall windows that let in slanted morning light and walls lined floor to ceiling with books organized in a system Harry itched to understand. Daphne Greengrass was standing at one of the long tables in the center of the room when he came in, and she did not look up immediately. She was small and fair, pale blonde hair pulled back, sharp features, blue-gray eyes that when they finally moved from the book to him were calm and assessing and entirely without the nervousness or warmth or frank curiosity that had characterized the other meetings. Daphne Greengrass looked at Harry Potter the way a chess player looked at an opening move, with interest, and with wariness, and with the beginnings of a counter-strategy already forming somewhere behind her composed expression. "You read the grimoire," she said. "3 times, Harry said. "Your father mentioned you were interested in that." "I was interested in what it implies." She closed her book, carefully, marking the page, and turned to face him fully. "The Potter Grimoire is not just a spellbook. It's a theoretical document. Reading it for information is easy. Understanding what James Potter was actually doing when he wrote his sections takes significantly more work. So." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you understand it?" Harry looked at her. The central theory in his section is that magic responds to intent more fundamentally than to technique. He was arguing that most wizards underperform because they've been taught to focus on form, wand movement, incantation, when those are actually just scaffolding. The actual load-bearing element is what you're trying to accomplish and whether you genuinely understand it. Daphne's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. And he applied that theory to the protective enchantments he wrote. They're not passive. They respond and adapt because he built the intent into the foundational structure, not just the surface layer. My mother's modifications in Chapter 12 made them more efficient by removing redundant confirmation loops in the pattern, Daphne said, and for the first time there was something alive in her voice beneath the composure. She understood that the intent response mechanism created its own confirmation if the foundation was sound. The loops were belt and suspenders thinking. Harry looked at her. "You've read it." "I obtained a copy of the published excerpts 3 years ago. There are 14 pages available in the Greengrass collection." She paused. "You have the full text?" "Yes." Silence. Not uncomfortable, more like 2 people recalibrating. "Sit down," Daphne said, and it came out as an invitation rather than an order, which Harry suspected was more than she'd intended. She sat across from him with the composure settled back in place, but thinner now, like armor that had been loosened slightly. "My father is cautious about this contract. He signed it because the political logic was sound and James Potter argued it convincingly, but 11 years of uncertainty have made him more cautious, not less. He wants proof that the alliance is viable before he commits the Greengrass name." "What kind of proof?" Harry said. "That's the question." She folded her hands on the table. I've been thinking about this since I was old enough to understand what the contract meant. The other families are, Longbottom is old military, they'll respond to demonstrated character. Abbott is agricultural, they're fundamentally pragmatic, they'll respond to reliability. Bones is law enforcement, they'll want integrity. But Greengrass, she stopped. Greengrass is political, Harry said. You want demonstrated capability. Not character, not reliability. Actual ability. She looked at him. The blue-gray eyes were very direct. Yes. What does demonstrated capability look like to you? She was quiet for a moment, genuinely thinking, not performing thought, and Harry found this enormously more interesting than someone who answered too fast. I want a duel, she said finally. A formal magical contest. Potter grimoire spells only, specifically the spells in your father's personal sections, which I haven't had access to. It would tell me whether you're someone who reads things or someone who understands them. Harry considered this. He'd been practicing the spells for 3 weeks, carefully, methodically, in the back garden at Privet Drive when the Dursleys were out, with the wand Ragnarok had procured for him from a private Ollivander's order on the grounds that a Potter heir walking into a public wand shop would cause more disruption than was useful at this stage. He was raw. Untrained in any formal sense. But he understood the theory behind the spells at a level that Ragnarok had called unusual and his father's notes had called, in a different context, exactly how this should work. When? Harry said. Daphne blinked. It was the first genuinely unguarded reaction she'd shown. You're agreeing. You asked for demonstrated capability. A duel does that. The question is when. I thought you'd negotiate the terms, she said, with the slight edge of someone whose planned next move had been preempted. The terms are fine, Harry said. Your family's library, neutral witnesses, Potter grimoire spells. That's fair. When? A pause. 2 weeks, Daphne said. That gives me time to study the theoretical framework without the actual spells, Harry said. You're preparing counter-strategies based on what you know of my father's magical theory. The edge in her expression sharpened into something that was, Harry realized, respect, reluctant, provisional, but genuine. Yes, she said. Good, Harry said. That makes it more interesting. From somewhere in the house, a small voice called, Daph, is the scary boy here yet? And Daphne closed her eyes briefly in the expression of an older sibling everywhere. That's Astoria, she said, in a flat voice. Your sister. She's not in the contracts. No. She's 5. She has opinions about everything and no social filter whatsoever. Daphne looked at him. She's going to want to come in. I don't mind, Harry said. Daphne called, yes, come in, but knock first, toward the door, and after a brief pause during which there was no knocking whatsoever, the door opened and a small girl with the same pale hair as her sister but her father's sharper features came in at speed, looked at Harry with wide, dark eyes, and said, without any preamble at all, you're smaller than I thought. Astoria, Daphne said. What? He is. Gran said he was the most powerful wizard of a generation and I thought that would be taller. She came all the way into the room and stood looking at Harry with the fearless curiosity of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend she doesn't notice things. Are you actually going to marry Daphne? That's a long way off, Harry said. How far off? Years. Astoria considered this. Daphne says you read the whole grimoire. I can read but mostly simpler books. Daphne reads complicated books but she doesn't laugh at them. Do you laugh at books? Sometimes, Harry said. Your great-grandmother made some annotations in one section that are very funny. Astoria looked at her sister. I want to read the funny parts. You're 5, Daphne said. That's not a reason. Daphne made a short, controlled noise that was as close to exasperation as she apparently allowed herself. Harry watched the two of them, Daphne's composure developing a hairline crack around the edges, Astoria absolutely unbothered, and thought that he liked the younger one rather a lot. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," he told Astoria. "I'll bring the funny pages." Astoria pointed at him. "I like him," she told Daphne. "That's a low bar," Daphne said. "It's not a low bar, it's just a different bar," Astoria said serenely, and went to look at the bookshelves, apparently satisfied. Daphne looked at Harry. Harry looked at Daphne. There was a brief, mutual silence that had something new in it, an acknowledgement, not warm exactly, but honest, that whatever was going to happen between them was going to be genuinely interesting. 2 weeks, Daphne said. 2 weeks, Harry agreed. He spent those 2 weeks the way he had spent the 3 weeks before them, reading, practicing, thinking. The grimoire had become as natural to carry as his glasses. He read it in the cupboard at night, at the kitchen table in the mornings, in the park on a blanket in the afternoons. He could feel the theory settling into him at a level that went deeper than memorization. It was becoming intuitive, the way arithmetic became intuitive eventually, the way you stopped counting steps and just walked. The spells themselves were more complicated. He practiced in the back garden with the wand Ragnarok had gotten him, a good one, 12 inches, holly and phoenix feather, which had chosen him with an eagerness that made the wandmaker's assistant write a memo that went immediately to Ollivander himself, and the first few days were humbling. Harry understood the theory. Understanding the theory and being able to execute it were two entirely different skills, and the gap between them was the gap between reading about swimming and being in the water. But Harry Potter was, in the specific way his father's letter had described as the Potter gift, someone for whom things clicked once he understood them structurally. By the end of the first week he had 3 of the spells clean enough that he was satisfied. By the end of the second week he had 7, and the other 4 were workable. He didn't have power behind them, he was 8, with less than a month of experience, but he had precision, and precision, his father's grimoire argued with considerable force, was what actually mattered. He also wrote letters to Neville, because they'd agreed to correspond and because Harry found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he wanted to. Neville's letters back were warm and detailed and full of herbology facts that he apparently assumed Harry would find as interesting as he did, and Harry found that he actually did find them interesting, which said something about both of them. To Susan, shorter exchanges but equally warm, she'd sent him a pack of exploding snap cards with a note explaining the rules and a postscript that said don't try to read the instructions, they're wrong about the middle rule, just trust me. To Hannah, who wrote the way she talked, in long breathless runs with sudden pivots into unexpected depth, and who had apparently already told her father that the contract was fine and he should stop worrying about it. To Ragnarok, who was not a correspondent by nature but who sent back precise, useful responses to each of Harry's questions about the Wisengamot petition, the proxy filing, the timeline more actions request aborted write the next chapter now. Chapter 3, What Gringotts Knows. The Wisengamot petition landed on the desk of Senior Under-Secretary Millicent Bagnold on a Wednesday morning in August, sandwiched between a routine land registry dispute and a complaint about a cauldron manufacturer in Birmingham, and it sat there for 6 hours before anyone noticed what it was. When they did, it created the specific kind of institutional chaos that happens when a bureaucracy encounters something it doesn't have a procedure for. Ragnarok had filed it impeccably. That was the first problem. It was so procedurally correct, so precisely formatted, cited the right statutes in the right order, attached the right supporting documentation, that there was no mechanism for rejecting it on technical grounds. It requested a formal review of the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black on the basis of procedural irregularity, specifically, the absence of any trial record in the Wisengamot archives. It was filed by a Gringotts representative acting as proxy for the holder of the Potter-Wisengamot seat. It was signed, sealed, and authenticated by Gringotts Bank in 3 places. It also included a 40-page legal brief that Ragnarok had spent 2 weeks assembling from Gringotts records, ministry public filings, and documents from the Potter Legacy Vault, and which made, in the dry, precise language of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, the argument that Sirius Black had been imprisoned without due process in violation of 3 separate foundational statutes of wizarding law. Bagnold read the first 5 pages, sent for the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and ordered T. By Thursday afternoon, Harry Potter knew about all of this because Ragnarok had sent him a summary via certified owl, and he was sitting in the Gringotts office on Wyvern Lane reading it with the focused attention of someone following the first moves of a game. "They'll try to reject it," Harry said. "They will try to delay it," Ragnarok corrected. "Rejection requires stating grounds. The petition is, as I designed it to be, extremely difficult to reject on grounds. Delay is easier, they can route it through committee review, which can take between 6 and 18 months under normal circumstances. Can we accelerate that? We can file a secondary petition invoking the prisoner's right to expedited review under the Charter of Wizard Rights, which was last used in 1743 but remains valid law." Ragnarok's expression was the goblin equivalent of mild satisfaction. "I have it prepared." "File it today," Harry said. "What else?" Ragnarok looked at him over the edge of the folder. This was a thing Harry had noticed. Ragnarok occasionally looked at him over the top of documents in a way that was not quite surprise, because Ragnarok did not appear to do surprise, but was something adjacent to it. An ongoing recalibration. "I have been doing this for 40 years, Mr. Potter. I know. I'm not trying to tell you how to do it. I want to understand the full picture." A brief pause. Ragnarok set the folder down. "The full picture is this. The petition will face resistance from two directions. The first is administrative inertia. The ministry does not like admitting procedural errors, because admitting one opens the door to examining others. The second is personal. There are people in the ministry who were involved in the decision to imprison your godfather without trial. They have careers to protect. Some of them have advanced considerably in the 11 years since." "Who?" Ragnarok looked at him steadily. "That is a question with answers that could be dangerous if handled incorrectly." "I'm not going to do anything dangerous with a list of names," Harry said. "I want to understand who benefits from Sirius staying where he is. That's the same analytical framework my father used for the marriage contracts. You look at who gains from a given arrangement and you understand the structure." Another long pause. Then Ragnarok reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a second folder, thinner, which he placed on the desk between them without comment. Harry opened it. There were 4 names. 3 were mid-level ministry officials who had been on the emergency committee that authorized the imprisonment. 1 was significantly more senior. Harry read it, closed the folder, and set it down. "Does Dumbledore know about this petition?" he asked. "He will by now," Ragnarok said. "The Hogwarts headmaster holds a position on the Wizengamot. The petition would have been distributed to all current members." "Then he'll come," Harry said. "Almost certainly." Ragnarok's tone was neutral in a way that suggested neutrality was a deliberate choice. "Albus Dumbledore has been managing the circumstances of your life for the past 7 years with considerable care. The filing of this petition from a proxy for your Wizengamot seat will have made it apparent that his management has developed an unmanaged variable." "Me," Harry said. "You," Ragnarok agreed. Harry sat with that for a moment. He had no particular feelings about Dumbledore. He knew the name, knew the reputation, knew that the man had apparently been orchestrating things from a distance for years, including, the documents suggested, the placement of Harry with the Dursleys. He didn't have enough information yet to be angry or grateful or anything specific. He had questions. "When he comes," Harry said, "I'd like it to be here. On neutral ground. I can arrange that. And I'd like to know in advance. Also arrangeable." Ragnarok looked at him. "Is there anything else?" Harry thought. "Yes, actually. The sealed investments in the Potter estate, the Wizarding Business Holdings. I need to understand them better. Who's currently running them?" Ragnarok reached for a third folder, and Harry had the sense that the goblin had prepared for exactly this question, which meant Ragnarok had been waiting for him to ask it, which meant the investments were something that required attention. He filed this observation and opened the folder. The investments took up most of the rest of that afternoon and most of the following morning, because the picture that emerged from them was more complicated than Harry had expected. His father had been, in addition to everything else, a significant financial mind. The 7 business interests ranged from a minority stake in a potions ingredient supplier to a controlling interest in a wizarding publishing house to, most interestingly, a substantial investment in Gringotts itself, which Harry hadn't known private individuals could hold and which Ragnarok explained was a legacy arrangement from 3 generations back, never dissolved because the returns were consistent and the Potter family had historically understood the value of having good relationships with Gringotts. "That's elegant," Harry said, reading the investment document. "Your father thought so." He added to the position. Ragnarok's voice had the quality it always got when James Potter came up, carefully neutral, but with something underneath it. He understood that Gringotts is not simply a bank. It is a network of information and influence that no other institution in the wizarding world has access to. "And the publishing house," Harry said, flipping to that section. "What does it publish?" "Educational materials, primarily. Also several influential journals. The Journal of Advanced Transfiguration, for one. 3 others." Harry looked up from the folder. "So we have significant stake in what information gets published in academic magical journals. The controlling interest has not been exercised in 11 years, Ragnarok said. The house has been running on autopilot since your parents' deaths. The editorial decisions have been made independently." "Who's been making them?" Ragnarok told him. Harry wrote down the name and circled it. "Is the current editor good at the job?" "By all accounts, yes." "Then leave it alone," Harry said. "I'm not interested in controlling content. I'm interested in not being ignorant about what influence I have." Ragnarok made a note. "The publishing house needs a new board member from the Potter side. It has gone without representation for 11 years. You can appoint a proxy for that position as well, if you wish. Can you recommend someone trustworthy for the board?" "I can recommend 3 candidates," Ragnarok said. "All of them are Gringotts certified financial practitioners, all of them are politically neutral, and all of them would find it professionally advantageous to represent the Potter interest." "Draw up the papers," Harry said. "I'll review the candidates this week." He stayed until the light through the office window had gone from afternoon gold to evening gray, working through the investment portfolio with Ragnarok in a methodical progression, and by the time he left he had a clearer picture of the Potter estate than he'd had that morning and a significantly longer list of things to follow up on. The satchel over his shoulder was heavier than when he'd come in, new folders, new documents, a separate envelope from Ragnarok containing the first draft of the Wizengamot secondary petition. He was halfway down Wyvern Lane, heading back toward the leaky cauldron, when he felt it. It wasn't a spell, he didn't have enough magical experience yet to identify specific magic by its feel, but he had enough to feel magic being used near him, a change in the air's texture like the moment before lightning. He stopped walking. An old man was standing at the entrance to Wyvern Lane, where it met Diagon Alley. Very tall, very thin, with a long silver beard and half-moon glasses and the kind of presence that took up more space than a person physically occupied, the quality of someone so accustomed to being the most important entity in any given room that their body had simply adjusted to it. Albus Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter for the first time with full attention, and Harry looked back at him, and the summer evening held them both in a moment of mutual assessment. Harry went first. "Hello, Professor Dumbledore." Dumbledore's expression did something complicated. "My dear boy," he said, and his voice was warm and careful and very precisely calibrated. "I wondered if I might speak with you." "Of course," Harry said. He gestured back toward the Grip Hook and Associates office. "Ragnarok won't mind us using the meeting room. It's more comfortable than standing in the alley." A pause. "I was rather thinking somewhere more private," Dumbledore said. "Wyvern Lane is private," Harry said. "And Ragnarok can witness the conversation, which is useful for both of us. Anything you say to me as my Wizengamot co-member and as a party who holds legal guardianship over me should probably be documented." The quality of Dumbledore's attention shifted. It was subtle, the warm expression didn't change, the posture didn't change, but something behind the half-moon glasses adjusted, like a chess player whose opponent has just revealed they've been playing a different game. "Very well," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "Lead the way." Ragnock produced tea without being asked, which Harry suspected was less hospitality and more an excuse to stay in the room, and set 3 cups on the meeting table with the air of someone who had been looking forward to this particular conversation for some time. Dumbledore sat with the ease of a man accustomed to any chair in any room and looked at Harry across the table with those bright, ancient eyes. "You have been busy," he said. "I've had a lot to catch up on," Harry said. "Indeed." Dumbledore wrapped both hands around his cup. "I should, perhaps, have come to see you sooner. I've been monitoring things from a distance. I thought it best to let you come to the magical world on your own terms." "I appreciate that," Harry said, because it was true, even if the motivation behind it was probably not as simple as Dumbledore was presenting it. "It gave me time to read without interference." "The grimoire," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice when he said it that was not quite wistfulness but was close, the tone of someone who had known the person who wrote it. "Your father was an extraordinary theorist. I suspect you found the personal sections particularly engaging." "Very much," Harry said. "His work on intent-based magic is more rigorous than most of what I've found in the Hogwarts curriculum texts." "The curriculum texts are conservative by design," Dumbledore said. "They need to serve a wide range of students." He paused. "I should mention that Hogwarts has a great deal to offer you. Your father and mother were both exceptional students." "I knew them both well." "I know," Harry said. "I've read everything in the vault about their time at school. They valued it." He met Dumbledore's gaze directly. "I expect I will too." This was, apparently, not what Dumbledore had expected him to say, because for a brief moment the careful warmth dropped in something more genuine, surprise, and then reassessment, moved across his face. "Good," he said, after a moment. "I am glad to hear it." "I want to talk about Sirius Black," Harry said. The warmth came back up, but with something careful underneath it now. "Ah," Dumbledore said. "The petition. It's procedurally correct," Harry said. "You know that, or you wouldn't have come." "It is," Dumbledore agreed. "Harry, may I call you Harry?" He paused. Sirius Black is a complicated situation. He was convicted, or, more accurately, imprisoned, in the immediate aftermath of very dark events. The decision was made quickly. There are those who believe it was made correctly. "There's no trial record," Harry said. "In the Wizengamot archives. None. He was never given the opportunity to speak in his own defense, never given veritaserum, never formally charged. That's not a complicated situation. That's a straightforward procedural violation of wizarding law. The circumstances at the time, the circumstances don't override the Charter of Wizard Rights," Harry said, and his voice was steady and clear, because he wasn't angry, he was informed, and those were different things. "My father's legal brief in the Legacy Vault is 40 pages. Ragnock's addition to it is another 40. Between them they established the violation clearly enough that the Wizengamot can't bury the petition, and we both know it." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The fireplace crackled in the small room. Ragnock sat in the corner with his tea and his expression of careful neutrality, watching both of them. "You are very much like your father," Dumbledore said finally, and this time there was nothing calculated about it. It was simply true, and the man felt it. "I hope so," Harry said. "James was also," Dumbledore paused, choosing words with the care of a man who had spent a century choosing them, someone who saw things in clear lines. "Right and wrong, with limited patience for the gray areas that political reality requires. My father built a political coalition through 5 marriage contracts that took a decade to ripen," Harry said. He was not naive about gray areas. He had very clear views about which gray areas were acceptable and which ones weren't. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Leaving an innocent man in Azkaban for 11 years falls on the wrong side of that line." A long silence. "I was not certain," Dumbledore said, very quietly. About his innocence. I am still not entirely, then Veritaserum and a trial will establish it, Harry said. That's what they're for. Dumbledore looked at him across the tea things, and Harry could see the man doing what all adults did when they encountered him, recalculating the gap between what they'd expected and what was in front of them. It took most adults 2 or 3 interactions to stop being surprised. He suspected Dumbledore might be faster. I will not oppose the petition, Dumbledore said. That is not the same as endorsing it, but I will not oppose it. You should know that there are others who will. I know who they are, Harry said, and glanced briefly at the thin folder he'd set on the corner of the table when they came in. Dumbledore followed his gaze. Something moved in those blue eyes, surprise, and a kind of respect, and something more careful underneath both. You have been thorough. I had good teachers, Harry said, and gestured toward Ragnarok without looking, which made Ragnarok's expression shift in a way that was the closest thing to surprised pleasure Harry had yet seen on the goblin's face. Dumbledore finished his tea, made small talk for exactly 5 minutes with the precision of a man who knew when to advance and when to consolidate, and left. Harry heard the flare in the front room and then the office was quiet. Ragnarok set down his cup. He's going to keep watching, Harry said. Yes. That's fine. I'm not trying to be invisible. Harry picked up his satchel. I just need to be a few moves ahead. Ragnarok looked at him with the bronze eyes that had been recalibrating for weeks now. Your father said something similar to me once, he said. He was 19. Harry looked at him. You are 8, Ragnarok said. I feel it bears noting. I know, Harry said. I feel 8 most of the time. Except when I'm in here. In here, Ragnarok said, you feel like a Potter. Harry picked up his bag and went home. 3 days later the ministry sent someone. Harry was in the back garden at Privet Drive, practicing the 4th adaptive shield from the grimoire, a piece of magic that involved less wand movement than intention, which he was still calibrating, when he felt the same texture change in the air that he'd felt before Dumbledore appeared in Diagon Alley. He lowered his wand and turned around. The man who had arrived into the back garden was Ministry, from the pressed robes to the official badge to the way he stood like someone who had been given authority recently and was very aware of it. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of forgettable medium face that Harry associated with people who were good at not being remembered, and he was holding a clipboard. Harry Potter, he said, as though there was some doubt about this. Yes, Harry said. Cornelius Fudge, Office of the Minister, Junior Undersecretary. He said this with a small unconscious straightening of posture. I'm here regarding a Wisengamot petition filed recently under your name. There are certain questions about the legitimacy of the proxy arrangement. The proxy was filed under Section 14 of the Wisengamot Representation Act of 1842, Harry said. Ragnarok of Gringotts is acting as my legal representative, not as a voting member in his own right. The seat remains Potter's. The arrangement is legal. Fudge blinked. Well, yes, technically, but there are questions about precedent. What questions? Harry said. The ministry would feel more comfortable if, what questions? Harry said again. Same tone. Not aggressive. Just precise. Fudge shifted his weight. He had not, Harry suspected, expected this from a child in a too large t-shirt standing in a suburban back garden. The minister would like to discuss the petition directly with you. In a more formal setting. The petition is being handled through proper legal channels, Harry said. If the ministry has procedural objections, they can file a counter-response through those channels. That's what they're for. He paused. Is that all? Fudge was doing the recalculating thing, but he was slower at it than Dumbledore, and less graceful, and when the recalculation didn't produce a satisfying result he went slightly pink and tried a different approach. Mr. Potter, I want to be helpful here. The minister is a great admirer of, well, of your family, and of the circumstances that led to. Did the minister have any involvement in the decision to imprison Sirius Black without trial? Harry asked. The pinkness deepened. That is not, yes or no. Mr. Potter, because the petition will be asking that question formally, Harry said. All parties involved in the decision will be asked to provide a formal account. That's standard procedure for a prisoner review. If the minister was involved, it would be much better for him to be transparent about the extent of that involvement now, rather than have it emerge during the formal review. Fudge opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I'm not threatening anyone, Harry said, very clearly. I'm telling you how the process works. Ragnarok has briefed me thoroughly. He looked at the man steadily. The goal of the petition is not to embarrass the ministry. The goal is to ensure that a man who may have been wrongly imprisoned gets due process. If he's guilty, the process will show that. If he's innocent, the ministry has an opportunity to correct an error before it becomes an even larger one. Fudge stood in the back garden of number 4, Privet Drive, with his clipboard and his pressed robes, and looked at an 8-year-old boy, and understood, slowly and without visible pleasure, that the conversation had gone in a direction he didn't have instructions for. I'll convey your position to the minister, he said, in the voice of someone who has decided to retreat and call it something else. Please do, Harry said pleasantly. And please also convey that if the ministry attempts to bury or delay the petition through procedural interference, we will file the secondary expedited review petition, which invokes prisoner rights under the 1743 Charter and cannot be routed through committee. We'd rather not do that. It tends to attract attention. Fudge left. Harry stood in the garden for a moment, then turned back to the shield practice, because the 4th adaptive shield was still rough at the edges and he had 8 days until the duel. From an upstairs window, Petunia Desley watched the man in the ministry robes disapparate from her back garden with an expression of deep, complicated resignation, and then she watched her nephew resume practicing with a stick, very precisely, as though whatever he was doing was the most natural thing in the world. She made a cup of tea and did not mention it to Vernon. Susan wrote the next morning. The letter was longer than usual, with an edge of urgency underneath the characteristic warmth. Harry, word is getting around. Aunt Amelia came home last night talking about the petition. She's on the law enforcement side of the Wisingamot and she's being careful about what she says, but I could tell she was impressed. Or worried. Possibly both. She kept saying, thorough, in the tone she uses for things that are thorough in a way that creates problems for people. A girl in my neighborhood whose parents work at the ministry told me that someone there is very unhappy about the proxy arrangement. She made it sound like they're trying to find a way to challenge it legally. I thought you should know. Also exploding snap rematch, you cheated last time. You didn't cheat but you figured out the pattern and that feels like cheating. Susan Harry smiled at that and wrote back, Susan, understanding the pattern isn't cheating, it's just paying attention. But I'll play with my left hand next time. Thank you for the information. I expected the pushback. Ragnarok has the secondary petition ready. Whoever is unhappy is about to become less happy, but there's not much they can do about it legally. Tell your aunt that I'd appreciate her honest read of the Wisingamot's likely response when this goes to full session, if she's willing to share it. Not asking her to take sides. Just asking for information from someone who knows the room better than I do. Harry he also wrote to Neville, who had heard about the petition through Augusta, who had apparently described it to the assembled Longbottom household as perfectly executed, exactly the right approach. I cannot believe an 8-year-old thought of it, which Neville transcribed in his letter with obvious delight and no small amount of pride, as though he'd done something himself by knowing Harry. She literally said, that boy, Neville wrote. She calls people, that boy, when she's really impressed and doesn't want to say so out loud. She called my grandfather, that boy, once and he basically glowed for a week. Harry read this letter twice, because it made him feel something he was still getting used to, the particular warmth of being known, of having people in his corner who were there because they'd chosen to be. He'd been alone a long time. Not dramatically alone, not in a way he'd ever complained about, because the Desleys hadn't given him the vocabulary for it and his own nature was too watchful to be loud about what it lacked. But he was beginning to understand the shape of what had been missing. He filed the warmth carefully, because he was Harry Potter and he filed everything, and then he went back to practicing. The night before the duel, he couldn't sleep. This wasn't anxiety. He'd checked himself twice for anxiety and found it wasn't there, which was either a good sign about his confidence or a sign that his self-assessment wasn't working properly, and he lay in the dark of the cupboard turning both possibilities over. The grimoire was on his chest. He'd read through his father's section again that evening, not studying, just being in it, the way you sometimes sat in a room with someone without needing to say anything. His father had written, in one of the margins, "The thing about magic is that it knows when you mean it. You can perform a perfect incantation with a perfect wand movement and perfect timing and still have it fail because you were thinking about lunch. Intent isn't a component of a spell. It's the spell. Everything else is just how you shape it." Harry stared at the underside of the stairs above him. Tomorrow he would walk into the Greengrass library and demonstrate capability to a girl who had been preparing counter-strategies based on theoretical knowledge, and he would use spells he'd been practicing for 2 weeks, and he would do it in front of all 5 families who would apparently be there as witnesses, because Ragnarok had told him quietly this morning that Augusta Longbottom had requested an invitation to observe and the other 3 families had followed, and Harry had said good. Actually, because he'd been thinking the same thing. He wasn't afraid of the duel. What he was, the word arrived slowly, in the particular way words arrived for Harry, which was from the back of his mind where they'd been sitting quietly until they were accurate enough to use, was ready. Not just for the duel. For all of it. For the part where things became real rather than theoretical, where the meetings and the letters and the documents became people who knew each other and made choices based on that knowing. He had 4 friends and a legal battle and a duel in the morning and a godfather in prison who didn't know anyone was coming for him. He closed his eyes. He thought about his father's handwriting, slanted and purposeful, and his mother's, smaller and precise, and the letter that had said "we loved you," present tense, and the photograph of 2 young people laughing at something off camera. Then he slept, and in the morning he was up before the sun. The secondary Wisingamot petition hit the ministry at 9 a.m. On the same day as the duel, Ragnarok had timed it with a precision that Harry suspected was not accidental. They had discussed the timing 2 days before, and Ragnarok had said, in the measured tone of a goblin who had been playing long games for 4 decades, "It is useful to have multiple things happening simultaneously. It is difficult to focus opposition on one target when there are 2. By 10 o'clock, when Harry stepped through the flue at Greengrass Manor, there were 3 ministry owls sitting on Ragnarok's office windowsill and a 4th had apparently tried to deliver something to the leaky cauldron under the assumption that Harry could be found there. Harry did not know this yet. He would find out from Ragnarok later that afternoon, after everything else had happened. For now, he came through the Greengrass fireplace, brushed the soot off his shoulder with the practiced motion of someone who had been doing this for 2 months, and walked toward the library where voices he recognized were already audible. All 5 families. All in one room. Augusta Longbottom stood near the window talking to Cyrus Greengrass in the clipped, precise tones of 2 people who respected each other and were being careful about it. Amelia Bones stood to one side with Ragnarok, who had fled ahead and was apparently already in conversation about something that made Amelia's expression go between interested and alarmed in short intervals. Helena Abbott was looking at the Greengrass bookshelves with the open delight of someone who loved books and made no attempt to hide it. Her husband, a calm, broad-shouldered man who said almost nothing and seemed to process everything, stood near the door. And then, the children. Neville, in the corner with Astoria, who had somehow commandeered him into a conversation about plants that he was clearly enjoying despite the bewildered expression of someone not sure how he got there. Susan, near the window, talking quietly with a girl Harry hadn't met yet, a small, dark-haired girl who turned out to be Hannah's cousin. Hannah herself, standing in the middle of the room looking extremely interested in everything, who caught Harry's eye when he walked in and gave him a brief, emphatic look that communicated, "I see what's happening here and it's genuinely ridiculous and also sort of magnificent." Harry looked back at her with a slight nod that said, "I know." Daphne was standing at the long central table, precisely where she'd been the first time Harry came to this room. She was in formal robes, pale gray, exactly right, and she was very still. She watched him cross the room toward her and said nothing until he reached the table. "You're punctual again," she said. 10 o'clock, Harry said. "Your family standard. Are you ready?" Harry set his satchel down by the table leg. "Yes." Something moved in her expression, that faint adjustment, the acknowledgement that he'd arrived as advertised. She reached into her own bag and produced a wand, setting it on the table between them. "The rules: Potter grimoire spells only, no physical contact, 3 knockdowns or a yield. Witnesses will call fouls. First yield or third knockdown ends it." She looked at him. "Any changes?" "No," Harry said. "But I want to add one thing." She raised an eyebrow. "After the duel, whatever the result, we compare notes." Harry met her gaze. "You've been working on counter-theory for 2 weeks. I want to know what you found. It'll be useful for both of us." The adjustment in her expression was more visible this time, something genuinely surprised, and then something that was closer to the look she'd had when they talked about his mother's modifications. Like a puzzle piece fitting correctly. "Agreed," she said. Augusta Longbottom called the room to attention in a voice that was used to being listened to, explained the structure and rules in 30 seconds, and then moved back to give them space. The library went quiet. Harry and Daphne stood across the table from each other, and then they each stepped back and the table was moved to the side by Cyrus Greengrass, and the center of the library became a dueling space, and everything that had been building since Tuesday in August stopped being theoretical. Harry raised his wand. Daphne raised hers. "Begin," said Augusta. Chapter 4, The Ice Queen's Gambit. Daphne moved first. It was smart, Harry had expected her to, because she was the challenger and the challenger usually set the tempo, and because 2 weeks of theoretical preparation had given her a plan she wanted to execute before he could read it. The spell that came off her wand was a compressed displacement hex, technically from the grimoire's 3rd chapter, designed to push a target backward without physical contact. Clean, efficient, conserved energy. It was exactly the right opening move and she threw it with precision. Harry stepped to the left. Not a counterspell, not a shield, just a step. The displacement hex grazed his shoulder and dissipated against the bookshelf behind him, and Daphne had already moved into her second spell before the first finished, which was also smart, but Harry had already read her angle because he'd spent 2 weeks thinking about what someone who understood his father's theory without having the actual spells would do, and the answer was this: she would use the theoretical framework to predict his responses and build chains. He let the second spell come, raised his wand, and didn't cast. He let her see him not casting. Daphne hesitated, just barely, a quarter second, because that wasn't what her chain predicted, and in that quarter second Harry cast the first adaptive shield from Chapter 7, not as a defense but angled forward, and the moment it locked he turned the intent of it inside out the way his father's notes had described, the way that made it not a barrier but a pressure, and Daphne hit it like walking into a strong wind, her next spell scattering off course. In the window, Neville's mouth fell open slightly. Susan had her hand over her mouth. Hannah was grinning. Daphne recovered faster than Harry expected. She was very good, he registered this clearly and without arrogance. She was the best opponent he was likely to face for years and she was operating at a disadvantage and still nearly keeping pace, and she switched tactics, abandoning the planned chain for something more improvisational, a lateral strike from his right with a spell Harry recognized from the grimoire's 5th chapter. He blocked it cleanly, felt the impact run up his arm, and fired back with a kinetic locking spell from the personal section that his father had marked with the note, "This one will surprise people." It surprised Daphne. The spell didn't hit hard. It barely touched her, just a glancing connection at her left side, but the intent built into it, and this was the heart of his father's theory. This was what Harry had spent 3 weeks actually understanding rather than just reading, was stop, and the magic responded to that intent rather than to the physical force, and Daphne's left arm locked at her side between one breath and the next. She adjusted immediately, switching her wand to her right hand, and Harry thought, with the clarity that came on him sometimes when something was going well. She's ambidextrous, she practiced this possibility. Which meant she'd anticipated being partially locked. Which meant she was more prepared than he'd given credit for. He recalibrated without slowing down. The next 30 seconds were the most technically interesting Harry had experienced since discovering he had magic, and he suspected, from the complete silence in the room behind him, that everyone watching thought so too. Daphne was operating on pure theory and speed of thought, constructing responses from what she understood about intent-based casting, and she was genuinely brilliant at it. She should not have been keeping pace. She was keeping pace. He went for the second knockdown. The spell he chose was from the last page of his father's personal section, the one with the longest margin note, the one that read, "I'm proud of this one but I'm afraid it might be too simple," which is usually how you know something is actually right. It was a grounding spell, not aggressive, not dramatic, not the kind of thing you'd expect in a duel, and its intent was not hit or push or stop but something more fundamental: here, be present in this body in this specific moment. It worked on the principle that most defensive casting involved a kind of mental distance from the immediate situation, a slight split of attention between acting and planning. The grounding spell closed that split. It pulled the target fully into the present moment. For Daphne, who had been running on a parallel track of theory and execution simultaneously, it was like a key turning in a lock. Her chain collapsed. Not her defense. Her chain of planned responses simply stopped running, and for one beat she was exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing, nothing else. Harry's third spell, the simplest one he knew, the first one from the grimoire's opening chapter, hit her cleanly in the chest. She went down. Not hard, the spell wasn't about force, it was about making the body acknowledge what had happened, and she caught herself on one knee, left arm still locked, wand still in her right hand. She looked up at him from the floor, and her expression was something Harry had not seen on Daphne Greengrass yet. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't anger. It was the very specific look of a person who has just understood something they didn't understand before and is rearranging their entire framework around the understanding. "The grounding spell," she said. "Third chapter, your father's annotations," Harry said. "It's marked as a meditative exercise." He never expected anyone to use it offensively. Because offensively it requires, she stopped. Start it again. It requires the caster to be so completely present that you can feel the gap in the target's attention and time it exactly. "Yes," Harry said. "How long did it take you to learn that?" "About a week to understand theoretically. 3 days to be able to actually do it." He offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and when she was standing the locked arm released and she shook it out with a controlled wince that she immediately suppressed. "You won," she said. "Yes. You said we'd compare notes after." "I meant it." She looked at him for the length of a full breath, and whatever the recalibration was that happened in Daphne Greengrass's mind during that breath, the result was that something in her expression settled into a different configuration than the one Harry had seen there before. Not warm, Daphne's warmth was a slow thing, he was already beginning to understand this. But honest. The cool, clean honesty of a person who had just decided something and wasn't going back. "All right," she said. "Let's compare notes." Behind them, the room exhaled. Augusta Longbottom said, which Harry had learned was the highest possible expression of approval from that particular source, and Neville made a sound beside her that was closer to, that was incredible, delivered at a volume designed to be audible to Harry specifically. Amelia Bones had her arms folded and was nodding slowly, the expression of someone confirming a hypothesis they'd held for a while. Cyrus Greengrass stood near the window with his hands clasped behind him, looking at Harry with an expression that had shed most of its careful assessment and replaced it with something that looked, in a Cyrus Greengrass way, like satisfaction. Helena Abbott said, "Well," very brightly, and her husband said nothing but shook Harry's hand with a grip that communicated more than most speeches. Harry moved through the room, accepting congratulations and deflecting them with the same steady composure, and then found himself beside Neville, who had broken free from Astoria and come across the room with the particular directness of someone who has decided that manners are less important than genuine feeling right now. You used the grounding spell, Neville said, with the intensity of someone who has studied magical theory more carefully than his grandmother gives him credit for. Offensively. I didn't even know that was, theoretically I could see how, but, your great-grandmother's annotation in Chapter 3 actually pointed toward it, Harry said. She wrote that the spell's effectiveness depended on the caster having total present-moment focus, and it occurred to me that if the caster needed it, the target would need it too, and that created the vulnerability. Neville stared at him. She wrote that about meditative practice. I know. But the principle is the same. Neville stopped. Shook his head. Then laughed, short and genuine and completely unguarded. That's exactly the kind of thing my gran would never think of because she takes the grimoire annotations at face value. She'd be furious she didn't see it. She would, Augusta said from 2 feet away, where she had approached without either of them noticing. Neville went slightly pink. She would also, Augusta continued, in the dry tone that Harry was learning to read as her version of warmth, acknowledge that seeing it required someone to approach the text without the weight of prior interpretation. That is not a disadvantage of your generation. It is, in fact, its primary advantage. She looked at Harry steadily. Well done, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Mrs. Longbottom. Augusta, she said, which Harry filed as significant. Astoria appeared at his elbow. She had been circling the room since the duel ended, apparently processing the event in the way 5-year-olds processed large things, which was by wandering and thinking loudly. Did you know you were going to win? She asked. I thought I probably would, Harry said honestly. But your sister is very good. She practices all the time, Astoria said. Morning and evening. Even when she's sick. She considered this. She's not going to tell you that. Astoria, Daphne said from across the room. I'm just saying it's not a secret, everyone in the house knows. It's not a secret, Daphne said, in the particular even tone of someone managing a situation. It's also not relevant. It's relevant because he should know he won against someone who practices really hard, Astoria said, with the absolute unassailable logic of a small child. She looked back up at Harry. She's not embarrassed that she lost. She's thinking about the grounding spell. I can tell because she gets a line between her eyebrows when she's rearranging her ideas. Harry glanced at Daphne. There was, in fact, a faint line between her eyebrows. Good to know, he told Astoria. You're welcome, she said serenely, and went back to Neville, who she had apparently decided was her preferred conversation partner and who was entirely too good-natured to resist. They ate lunch in the Greengrass dining room, a long, sunlit room that was formal in its bones but warm in its current occupation, all 5 families at the same table for the first time, the children on one side and the adults on the other, which had not been formally arranged but happened organically because that was what children did when given adjacent chairs and a common experience. The conversation found its own level quickly. Neville talked to Susan about magical plant applications and healing, which Susan found interesting from her aunt's law enforcement perspective, botanical evidence, there's a whole subfield, and Hannah talked across Harry to Daphne about something involving a summer reading list, and Harry sat in the middle of it and ate excellent food and felt the particular quiet satisfaction of watching something work the way it was supposed to. Halfway through the meal, Daphne said to him, quietly, under the ambient noise of the table, the note comparison. After lunch. Yes, Harry said. I want Neville there, Daphne said, in the tone of someone who has thought this through. He's read more of the grimoire annotations than anyone else at this table. Harry looked at her. How do you know that? Because he wrote to Hannah about them after your Longbottom meeting and Hannah mentioned it and I read everything Hannah mentions because Hannah mentions things that sound trivial and frequently aren't. She said this without any particular self-consciousness. He has a perspective on the herbological sections that I think will be useful in the broader theoretical discussion. That's a very deliberate sentence, Harry said. I'm a deliberate person, Daphne said. I know. Harry looked down the table to where Neville was currently being interrogated by Astoria about whether plants had feelings. What you're actually doing, Harry said, is building him into the analysis. Not because his herbology knowledge is particularly relevant to combat magic theory. But because he's going to be one of us, and you want to establish the precedent now. Daphne was quiet for one beat. The grounding spell works on me too, she said. I'll get better at resisting it. I know, Harry said. That's why I told you what it was. She turned to look at him, and whatever she found in his expression made the line between her eyebrows appear briefly, the thinking line, Astoria's diagnostic, and then smooth away. You want all of us to understand the theory, she said slowly. Not just to be in the alliance. You want us to actually understand what your father was building and be able to use it. The coalition only works if the people in it are genuinely capable, Harry said. Alliances built on position fall apart when the position shifts. Alliances built on shared understanding of something real, are structurally stable, Daphne finished, and there was something in her voice that was, for the first time, not composed or calculated or even honest in the way of someone who has decided to be honest. It was simply interested. Genuinely, personally, engaged. The voice of someone who has found the conversation they actually wanted to be having. Yes, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my father said your father argued the contracts persuasively. He said it the way he says things when the argument was so good he's still not entirely sure he agreed for the right reasons. What would the right reasons be? That the thing being argued for is actually good, rather than just that the argument is excellent. She looked at him. The argument your father made was structural. Political. Analytically sound. But the thing being argued for, a real coalition, not a paper one, requires something more than good analysis. I know, Harry said. Does it bother you? That it started as a political arrangement? Harry considered this honestly, the way he considered everything. No, he said. Because the way things start isn't the same as what they become. The Longbottom started as a political decision and now Neville is the person I most look forward to writing to. The Abbot started as a political decision and Hannah told me I was normal and offered me treacle tart and that might be the kindest thing anyone has done in a year. He paused. And the Greengrass contract started as a political decision and you just asked me a question that no one else at this table would have asked because no one else has thought about it this carefully. Daphne looked at him. The line wasn't between her eyebrows now. Her expression was simply open, in the specific way of a person who has stopped managing an interaction and started existing in it. I'll be honest, she said. I expected to come into this meeting and find someone I could work with but not respect. The son of a war hero, probably accustomed to that status, probably relying on it. And? Harry said. And instead I lost a duel to 8-year-old spellwork that was better than mine because you understood it and I only knew about it. She picked up her fork with the composure of someone returning to baseline after a brief excursion. It's annoying. But it's also, correct. That's the right outcome. It really bothers you, Harry said. Not unkindly. Losing? Yes. Losing to someone who genuinely earned it? A brief pause. Less. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. Down the table, Astoria was explaining to Neville that plants definitely had opinions and he should listen to them more, and Neville was taking notes, which said everything about Neville. After lunch, Daphne said, we compare notes. And then, Harry said, because the idea had arrived while they were talking and he trusted ideas that arrived while he was doing something else, I want to show all three of you, Neville, Susan, the full personal section of the grimoire. Not pages. The actual book. Daphne went still. That's, my book, Harry said. My decision. And if what my father was trying to build is going to work, the people at the center of it need to actually understand what he built. He picked up his own fork. You can't steward something you don't understand. They were in the library for 4 hours. Harry set the grimoire on the central table and opened it, and the three of them, Daphne on his left, Neville across from him, Susan on his right, gathered around it in the afternoon light, and what happened over those 4 hours was not a study session and not exactly a strategy meeting and not exactly a conversation. It was something Harry didn't have a word for yet, something that felt like the moment when separate instruments find the same key. Daphne read fast and retained everything, asking precise questions with the click-click-click efficiency of a mind that processed information in clean logical progressions. Every few pages she would stop and restate something in her own words, not to show she understood it but to check whether she did, which Harry found deeply gratifying because it was the same thing he did. Neville was slower but different. He made connections between sections that no one else had flagged, drew lines between the botanical magic notes and the intent theory, and something in the defensive chapter that he said reminded him of the way root systems responded to pressure, which sounded tangential until he explained it, and then it was the most illuminating thing anyone said all afternoon. Susan asked the questions that mattered to people. Not the theoretical questions, the human ones. Who would have used this? When would this have mattered? What were they afraid of when they wrote this? She turned the grimoire from a document into a history, and the history made the theory land differently. Harry watched all three of them and thought about what his father had written in the letter. The 5 houses, when combined, constitute a majority block. He'd read that as political arithmetic. He was beginning to understand it as something more specific, that each house brought not just a vote but a kind of intelligence, a particular way of understanding the world, and the coalition's strength wasn't in the number of votes but in the fact that those intelligences together could see things that none of them could see alone. He said as much, at one point, and the three of them looked at him with varying expressions, Daphne with the line between her brows indicating recalibration, Neville with the open surprised delight face he made when an idea fit with something he'd been thinking, Susan with the warm, steady look that meant she was adding this to the pile of things she'd already understood and was glad to have confirmed. "You sound like your father's letter," Neville said. "I've been reading it a lot," Harry said. "Can I?" "Sorry, you don't have to ask," Harry said. "Can I read it?" "Not now, only if you wanted to. It's private." "I don't." Neville stopped himself and looked embarrassed. "I'll copy the parts that are relevant to the coalition," Harry said. "The personal parts I'll keep. But the structural parts, the reasoning behind the contracts, those belong to all of us as much as me." Neville nodded, with the expression of someone who has been treated with considerably more consideration than they expected. Outside, the light had turned the deep gold of late afternoon, and through the library windows Harry could see the adults in the garden, Augusta and Cyrus deep in conversation, Amelia and Helena sitting together with tea, the abbot patriarch walking the garden perimeter with his hands clasped behind him and his eyes on the middle distance. They'd given the children 4 hours, which meant they'd trusted what was happening in here, which meant something about all of them. Daphne closed the grimoire carefully. "The black contract," she said. Harry looked at her. "I've been thinking about it throughout the session," she said. "You have 4 alliances confirmed. The 5th is in legal dispute with Narcissa Malfoy as the current family head. But the contract was signed by Sirius Black, who is still alive." She folded her hands. "If the Wisingamot petition succeeds and he's released, he becomes the Black family head again," Harry said. "The contract was always valid. The legal dispute is Narcissa's attempt to void it on the grounds that the signatory is imprisoned and she's the acting head. But Sirius isn't dead. He's imprisoned on charges that are procedurally void. The moment those charges are addressed, the contract reinstates fully," Daphne said. "And the Black family's seat on the Wisingamot comes back into play." "Yes," Harry said. Neville was very still. "What does the Black Alliance bring?" Harry had thought about this. Oldest magic in Britain. Properties. Financial holdings that have been running without proper oversight for 11 years. "Anne," he paused. "Sirius Black was my father's best friend. He was supposed to be my guardian. He's been in Azkaban for 11 years for something he didn't do." He looked at the table. The alliance is important. But that's not the primary reason I'm working on the petition. The three of them were quiet. Susan put her hand briefly on top of his on the table, just a moment, just a touch, and then she took it back and straightened her cup of tea. Of course not, she said simply. Neville nodded. Daphne said nothing, but she uncrossed her arms, which was, for Daphne, the equivalent of a significant gesture. He doesn't know anyone's coming, Harry said. He's been in there for 11 years and no one has done anything. And he stopped, because the contents of the serious black legal brief were in his head very clearly, the cold, precise detail of 11 years of Azkaban exposure, and what Ragnarok had described when Harry asked what that actually meant for a person. He's not well. But he's alive. And alive means there's still time. The library was quiet except for the sound of the garden outside, the muffled conversation of adults, a bird somewhere in the greengrass trees. What can we do? Neville asked. Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom, nervous at first, plant-talking, dry-humored Neville, was looking back at him with the specific expression Harry had come to think of as Neville's real face, not the anxious one, not the cautiously hopeful one, but the one underneath those, the one that was simple and clear and said, "I'm here, what do you need?" "Your grandmother has a Wizengamot seat," Harry said. "If she voted in favor of the expedited review, she'd be the fifth vote we need to get it to full session without going through committee." Neville's expression steadied. "I'll talk to her today." "You don't have to. It's a political ask, Harry," Neville said, patiently. "She called you, that boy," in the impressed tone. "If I ask her tonight and explain why, she'll have already been thinking about it for 6 hours and she'll probably say yes." He paused. "Besides, it's right. That's the thing she actually cares about. Whether something is right." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. "Thank you." "Stop thanking us," Susan said. "That's the third time this afternoon. She stopped. "People," Hannah said from the doorway, where she had appeared at some point without anyone noticing, holding a cup of tea and leaning against the doorframe with the easy comfort of someone who had decided this was her room too. "We're your people, Harry. That's the word." Harry looked at her. Then at Susan. Then at Neville. Then, last, at Daphne, whose expression was composed and steady and had the same quality it had acquired over the table at lunch, the quality of someone who has stopped managing the situation and started being in it. "Okay," Harry said. "Also," Hannah said, "Mrs. Longbottom is in the garden saying something to Cyrus Greengrass about the Wizengamot seat and they look very serious and I think it's about serious." She sipped her tea. "Just so you know. The families met formally before they left, all the adults together in the Greengrass drawing room while the children were nominally in the adjacent room and actually listening with varying degrees of subtlety." Harry sat closest to the door, which was not entirely closed, and heard what was said with the clarity of someone who had learned to be still and quiet in small spaces. Augusta spoke first, in the tone she used when she had already decided something and was communicating the decision. "The petition will have Longbottom support at full Wizengamot session. I'll file the vote indication this week." A brief pause. "Bones as well," Amelia said. "For the record, Augusta, I looked at the brief 3 days ago. It is thorough." "Gringotts is thorough," Augusta said dryly. "What I find interesting is that an 8-year-old boy provided the original legal framework, and a goblin solicitor built the procedural structure around it." "What I find interesting," Cyrus Greengrass said, in the careful tone of a man choosing words, "is that the boy in question sat in my library for 4 hours this afternoon and did not once show off. He shared the grimoire freely. He credited everyone else's contributions. He told my daughter what he was doing and why." A brief pause. "James Potter was the same way. I had forgotten that." Helena Abbott said, "Our support goes without saying." "Nothing goes without saying," Augusta said, but there was a smile in her voice. "Say it anyway." "Abbott House supports the Serious Black petition," Helena said, with the amused formality of someone who finds proceduralism charming rather than irritating. And everything else. We're in. In the adjacent room, Hannah pressed her shoulder against Harry's and said very quietly, "That's your dad, that is. The thing he built." Harry looked at his hands. "Yeah," he said. He was home by 7. The Dursley house was quiet. Vernon was watching television, Dudley was upstairs, and Petunia was in the kitchen reading with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She looked up when he came in. She looked at him for a long moment. "You won," she said. Harry blinked. "How did you walk differently when things have gone well?" She said it without looking up from her book. "You always have. Even when you were small." A pause. "Sit down. There's food on the hob." Harry sat down and served himself, and Petunia went back to her book, and the kitchen was quiet in the specific way it sometimes was between them, not warm, not cold, but honest. Two people coexisting in a space with the understanding that the coexistence was real even if it wasn't simple. "The duel," Harry said. "And the meeting." It went very well." Petunia said. Then, after a moment, "Your mother was good at meetings. She could walk into a room and understand the whole of it in 30 seconds. Who wanted what, who was afraid of whom, where the center of gravity was. She turned a page. She said it was something you could learn, but mostly you either had it or you didn't." Harry ate his food. "Did you have it?" "No," Petunia said, with the flat honesty she sometimes deployed unexpectedly. "I was always looking at the wrong things. She used to say I was looking at the surface when the information was all underneath." She closed the book, which she hadn't actually been reading. "You have it. I've watched you do it since you were old enough to walk. You'd come into a room and just settle, the way she did. Reading everything." The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't know that," Harry said. "There are things about her I don't talk about," Petunia said, in the tone that meant the topic had a fixed boundary. "But occasionally one escapes." She picked up her cup, found it cold, made a small sound of dissatisfaction. "What were you doing today?" "Generally." "Building something," Harry said. "The way Dad was building it before he died. I found the plans and I'm building it." Petunia looked at him. The complicated thing was in her face again, the one that wasn't dismissal and wasn't warmth but was something older and more textured than either. "Don't get so caught up in the building," she said, "that you forget to live in the house." Harry looked at her. She got up to make fresh tea, the conversation apparently concluded by her standards, and Harry sat at the kitchen table and turned the sentence over and added it to the pile of things he was keeping. Ragnar's owl arrived at 10 p.m., which meant the news was urgent. The ministry had not formally accepted the secondary petition. Instead, they had routed it to a newly formed subcommittee specifically convened to review unusual prisoner review requests, which was procedurally creative and transparently designed to bury it in a layer of bureaucracy that didn't previously exist. The subcommittee had been given a 12-month review timeline. At the bottom of Ragnar's note, in the precise economical handwriting of a goblin who had been at this longer than Harry had been alive, "I anticipated this. Counterfiling attached. Also, the Longbottom vote indication has been received. So has Bones." Abbott filed simultaneously. "We have 3 confirmed votes. We need 5 for a full session demand. 2 more required. See attached list of Wisengamot members whose position is movable." Harry spread the attached papers on his bed and read by the narrow hall light under the cupboard door. The list had 7 names. 3 were immediately dismissible, long-standing ministry loyalists whose votes would not move regardless of argument. 2 were genuinely neutral. 1 was listed with a note that said professional grievance against current ministerial administration, possible motivation to vote independently. And 1, Harry read the last name twice. Then he read Ragnar's annotation beside it, Arcturus Black. Age 79. current senior black family patriarch who has avoided public alignment since the war. His vote has been absent from every contested Gringotts session for 11 years. He has never formally endorsed the imprisonment of Sirius Black. He has never protested it. He is, by all available evidence, waiting. Waiting for what, I cannot say. Possibly for someone to ask him directly. Harry looked at the ceiling of the cupboard, at the familiar pattern of knots in the wood above him. He thought about an old man who had been waiting for 11 years. He thought about what it meant to wait that long for someone to ask you a direct question. He picked up his quill, pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him, and wrote a letter. Not through formal channels. Not through Gringotts. Not routed through legal representation or official etiquette. Just a letter. A direct letter, in his own handwriting, to an old man who had a vote and had never used it. He wrote, "Dear Mr. Black, I am Harry Potter. I am 8 years old. I have been working with Gringotts on a petition to give my godfather a trial he never had. I need 2 more votes to bring the petition to a full Gringotts session, and you are on a list of people who might be willing to provide one. I know this is a blunt approach. I thought you might prefer blunt to formal. If I'm wrong, I apologize, and you can write back telling me the correct etiquette and I will use it next time. I don't know what you think about Sirius Black. I don't know what happened between your family and him. But he is in Azkaban for something he didn't do, and he has been there for 11 years, and I am asking you to help me get him a fair hearing. Please write back." Harry Potter. He sealed it, tied it to the Gringotts owl, which had been waiting on the windowsill with the patience of a creature that had learned patience from long association with an institution that operated on geological timescales, and sent it. Then he lay back on his cot in the dark, and listened to the ordinary night sounds of Privet Drive, a car passing, a dog somewhere, the distant rhythmic complaint of someone's television, and thought about the next morning, and the morning after that, and the shape of the thing he was building, and how it felt less like construction and more like recognition, like something that had always been there becoming visible. He was asleep before 11. 3 floors above him, Petunia Desley stood at the upstairs window looking at the garden where a small barn owl had just taken off into the dark, and thought about a girl she'd grown up with who had walked into rooms and understood the whole of them in 30 seconds, and the boy sleeping in the cupboard under the stairs who did exactly the same thing, and all the years she'd spent trying not to see the resemblance. She went to bed. She did not mention any of it to Vernon. The response from Arcturus Black arrived 3 days later. It was a single line, on paper so old it felt like touching history: "Come on Saturday. Bring the full petition brief. Don't be late." Harry read it, folded it carefully, and told Ragnarok to clear Saturday morning. He responded, Ragnarok said. He sounded, for the first time in their acquaintance, genuinely surprised. He was waiting for someone to ask, Harry said. That's all. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the note in his hand. We're close, he said. Yes, Ragnarok said. We are. Outside the office window, Diagon Alley moved through its morning, entirely unaware that in a small room on Wyvern Lane, an 8-year-old boy had just pulled a 79-year-old man out of 11 years of deliberate silence with a single blunt letter. Harry Potter set the note down, picked up his quill, and moved on to the next thing. Chapter 5. Before the letters come. Arcturus Black lived in a house that had decided a long time ago that it didn't care what anyone thought of it. Black Manor, not the London townhouse, which had been shut since the war, but the Black family's original seat in the Scottish borders, was old in the way that made most old things look recently assembled. The stone was the particular dark grey of something quarried from the earth before anyone living had been born, and the grounds were not manicured but wild in a deliberate, considered way, like someone had made the decision centuries ago that nature would be permitted to do what it wanted within the walls and had since been proven correct. A blackthorn hedge ran the perimeter, thick and serious. The gate opened when Harry approached it, which he took as a good sign. Ragnarok had come with him. Harry had asked, and Ragnarok had agreed without asking why, which meant the goblin had already assessed the situation and reached the same conclusion. A meeting with the senior patriarch of the Black family, at his personal estate, warranted a witness who understood legal nuance. They were met at the door not by a house elf or a butler but by Arcturus Black himself, which Harry had not expected. He was a tall man, or had been. Age had pulled him slightly inward, curved the broad shoulders, deepened the lines of a face that had clearly once been striking and still was, in the way of old things that have become more themselves over time. He had the Black family features, sharp bones, dark eyes, the quality of someone accustomed to being looked at and being indifferent to it, and he was dressed in robes that were old and impeccably maintained and said the same thing as his house: "I have been here a long time and I do not perform for anyone." He looked at Harry for a long moment. "You have Doria's eyes," he said. Not James's hair or Lily's eyes, which was what everyone else said. Doria. Harry filed this immediately. Doria Potter, née Black, his paternal grandmother, who had been a Black before she was a Potter, which meant Arcturus was Harry's great-uncle by marriage. "I didn't know that," Harry said. "Most people don't remember Doria." Something moved in Arcturus's expression, brief and contained. "Come in." The house inside was dark in the way of places where the curtains have been mostly closed for years, but not dusty. It was meticulously clean, just dim, and the rooms Harry could see were full of things that had weight to them, the accumulated gravity of a family that had been depositing objects and meaning into spaces for 3 centuries. Portraits on the walls. Harry didn't look too closely, but he was aware of eyes following their progress down the hall. A Black family trait, apparently, he thought, not quite humor but close. Arcturus took them to a study that had windows and used them. The morning light came in at a long angle, catching the dust in the air and the silver thread embroidery on 2 old armchairs and the Gringotts authentication marks on a row of document folders on the desk. Harry noticed the folders immediately. They were already out. Had been out before the visit. Arcturus Black had been preparing. "Sit," Arcturus said, and settled himself in the chair behind the desk with the careful deliberation of someone for whom sitting down had become an act requiring some thought. He did it without making anything of it. "The goblin can use the window seat. There are refreshments." He gestured at a side table. "Don't thank me for them, it's not hospitality, it's practicality. This will take a while and hungry people are inattentive." Ragnarok took the window seat and produced a notebook from somewhere. Harry sat in one of the armchairs and did not help himself to anything yet because he was reading the room and the room was telling him things. The document folders on the desk had Gringotts markings on 3 of them. On the 4th, in handwriting Harry didn't recognize, older, more formal than his father's, was written Sirius Orion, legal correspondence. The folder was thick. "You've been building a file," Harry said. Arcturus looked at him with the dark eyes that were taking ongoing inventory. 11 years, he said. "Why didn't you do anything with it?" "Because I was waiting for someone with standing to do something first." The old man's voice was dry and precise, the voice of someone who had stripped everything unnecessary from their communication long ago. "The Black family seat has been functionally dormant since the war. I have no direct heirs who are not either imprisoned, dead, or—" He paused. "Compromised in their alignment. My vote on any prisoner petition would be immediately challenged as self-interested by the ministry. They would use it to contaminate the petition. A foreign interest. Easier to dismiss." He looked at Harry steadily. "But the Potter seat, filed through Gringotts, which has no family interest in the Black case, that changes the framing." "That's what you were waiting for," Harry said. "Not just for someone to ask. For someone with the right standing." "Your father would have understood it immediately," Arcturus said. "James was a strategist. He would have seen the framing problem in the first 5 minutes." A pause. "You took 3 days. Which is, given your age and the fact that you found the vault 8 weeks ago, not slow." Harry looked at the old man and understood that this was the Black family version of an enthusiastic compliment. "I want to ask you something directly," Harry said. "I wouldn't have invited you here for indirect questions." "Ask. Do you think Sirius is innocent?" The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the Scottish morning was doing its cool, grey best. In the corner, Ragnar's quill was still. Arcturus looked at Harry for a long time. Not performing consideration, actually doing it, actually sitting with the question the way people only did when the question was one they'd been sitting with for years and each iteration of it opened something. I think, he said finally, that Sirius Black has many genuine faults. He was reckless. He was arrogant in the particular way of someone who has been told they are exceptional since birth and believes it more than is useful. He made choices that were destructive. He stopped. I also think that he loved James Potter the way some people love, completely and without reservation, in a way that would have made betrayal not just wrong but structurally impossible. Not because he was good enough to resist it. Because the loyalty was constitutive. It was part of what he was. He looked at Harry. That is not a legal argument. But you asked what I think. I did, Harry said. Thank you for answering it honestly. Arcturus looked at him. The inventory-taking quality settled into something else, recognition, and behind it something that Harry was careful about identifying but which looked, in an old man's face, like relief. Your letter was blunt, Arcturus said. Ragnar told me you might prefer blunt. Arcturus turned to look at Ragnar. You've never met me, he said. I have met your solicitors, your bank representatives, and the legal filings you have submitted over a 40-year period, Ragnar said. People reveal themselves in their documents more clearly than they intend to. You prefer direct communication and distrust performance. Arcturus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, to Harry, your goblin is perceptive. My colleague, Harry said. Not my goblin. Another silence. Something shifted in the old man's face, slight, but real. The petition, Arcturus said, and reached for the Sirius folder. Show me your full brief. They were there for 4 hours. Arcturus Black went through the Gringotts petition brief with the focused thoroughness of someone who had been a Wisengamot member for 50 years and knew exactly how these documents were attacked, and he found 3 procedural vulnerabilities that neither Harry nor Ragnar had flagged, and he suggested specific amendments that closed them. He did this not as an ally performing a service but as someone who had been waiting for a competent piece of work to arrive on his desk and was now engaging with it fully, without ceremony, because the work was what mattered. Harry took notes. He asked questions when he didn't understand, and Arcturus answered them without condescension, in the tone of someone who found genuine questions refreshing. Ragnar occasionally interjected with a legal citation or a counterpoint, and Arcturus engaged with these directly, and the 3 of them worked through the document in the way that good analytical work happened, which was without ego and without performance and with total attention on the problem. At the end of it, Arcturus sat back in his chair and looked out the window at the wild garden for a moment. I'll vote yes, he said. I'll file the vote indication today. He looked back at Harry. That gives you 4. You need 1 more. I know, Harry said. I'm working on the 5th. Who? Harry had thought about this carefully, in the night since Ragnar sent the list, turning the names over with the same methodical attention he gave to everything. Tiberius Ogden, he said. He's been distancing himself from the current administration for 2 years. His last 3 votes have been independent of the bloc. And the brief we have includes evidence that the subcommittee convened to bury the petition was formed at the direct request of 2 people who were on the original decision committee. If Ogden sees that material, he'll recognize it as the cover-up it is, Arcturus said. Yes. Tiberius is vain, Arcturus said. Not stupidly vain. Vain about his reputation for integrity. He has cultivated it for 30 years and it's genuinely important to him. He looked at Harry. If you present the cover-up evidence correctly, not as an accusation, but as information he needs in order to vote with integrity, he will not be able to ignore it. That's what I thought, Harry said. Arcturus looked at him. The recognition in the old man's face had deepened over 4 hours into something that had less caution in it. You are going to be very difficult for certain people, he said. Not as a warning. as a simple observation of fact. I know, Harry said. Your father was also very difficult for certain people. It was his best quality. Harry looked at the folder on the desk with Sirius's name on it. 11 years of correspondence, compiled by an old man in a dark house in Scotland who had been waiting for someone with the right standing and the right framing and the willingness to ask a direct question. Can I ask something else? Harry said. Arcturus gestured. When Sirius gets out, Harry said, what does he come back to? Legally. Practically. What's his situation? Arcturus was quiet for a moment. Complex. The Black family head designation has been in dispute. Narcissa has been acting in the role but without formal legal standing. She could not claim it while the question of Sirius's guilt remained open, because he was imprisoned, not dead, and imprisonment does not transfer the headship under Black family law. He paused. When the wrongful imprisonment is established, his headship reinstates fully, retroactively. Everything Narcissa has managed in his name reverts to his authority. She won't like that, Harry said. She will despise it, Arcturus said, without particular concern. Narcissa is intelligent and politically adept and she will adapt. She has a husband and a son to think about. The Malfoy name will insulate her. She will not be pleasant about the transition, but she will make it. He looked at Harry steadily. Sirius himself will need considerable support. Azkaban is not survivable without damage. He will need people. He will need a reason to recover. Harry thought about this. About a man who had been James Potter's best friend, who had loved that friendship constitutively, who had spent 11 years in the worst prison in Britain for the crime of being in the wrong place when someone else's betrayal exploded. He'll have a reason, Harry said. Arcturus looked at him for a long moment. Yes, the old man said quietly. I suppose he will. Tiberius Ogden proved Arcturus correct. Harry didn't meet him in person. Ragnarok handled the formal delivery of the petition brief, with the subcommittee evidence appended in a sealed section marked Ministry Procedural Irregularities, Material Evidence. The reply came back in 48 hours, terse and formal and containing within its precise legal language the specific indignation of a man who had been given information he hadn't known he needed and found it intolerable. He would vote yes. Ragnarok sent Harry a note that said only 5 votes. Full session demand filed. Response expected within 10 days. And beneath that, in smaller handwriting that Harry had learned meant something was being communicated that wouldn't be communicated in the formal text, well done. Harry pinned the note above his cot in the cupboard and went back to the grimoire. The Wisengamot scheduled the full session review for the last week of August, which gave Harry 3 weeks. He used them. The Potter family seat on the Wisengamot needed to be formally activated, which required submitting the proxy documentation to the full chamber and having it ratified, which required drafting the formal motion, which required Ragnarok to spend several days navigating a procedural landscape designed by people who had never anticipated this particular situation. Harry helped where he could and stayed out of the way where he couldn't, which was the balance he was finding worked best with Ragnarok: contribute what he actually had, trust the expertise he didn't. He also wrote to each of the 5 families, separately, with updates on the petition timeline and a brief summary of what the full session review would look like. He wrote these letters carefully, not as political communications, but as the kind of letters you wrote to people you wanted to keep informed because you respected their intelligence and valued their involvement. Each letter was slightly different, calibrated to the person receiving it. Neville's included the argument he thought Augusta should make if she had floor time during the session. Susan's included a question about whether Amelia had any procedural insight that could preempt the Ministry's likely countermoves. Hannah's included a short, honest account of how he was feeling about it, because Hannah had a way of asking without asking that made him want to answer properly. Daphne's was the most analytical, a point-by-point summary of where the petition stood legally, the counter-arguments he anticipated, and the specific question of whether the Greengrass network in continental Europe had any equivalence to the British Wisengamot review process that could be cited as precedent. She wrote back the next day with 6 citations, each one precisely relevant, with brief annotations explaining why. He sent her a note that said, "Thank you. These are exactly right." She wrote back, "I know." He laughed, which was becoming more frequent. He noticed this without analyzing it, because some things were better just noticed. Potter Manor stood in the Somerset countryside, behind a Fidelius charm that had been maintained since the war by the Gringotts Estate Management Service, and entering it for the first time required Harry to stand at the gate while Ragnarok performed the charm-lifting procedure, which took 20 minutes and involved a great deal of careful wand work and what sounded like very pointed goblin commentary on the quality of certain Ministry-era protective spellwork. Then the gate opened, and Harry walked up the drive, and the manor was there. It was not enormous in the way that aristocratic houses sometimes were enormous, designed to communicate power through scale. It was a good house. Stone and timber, covered partly in something that wasn't quite ivy but moved with a similar slow possession of the walls. Gardens that had been untended for 11 years but had handled the neglect with more grace than might have been expected, growing wilder and denser around a structure that remained fundamentally sound. Big windows. A door that was the right size for the house, not oversized to make visitors feel small. Harry stood in the drive and looked at it and felt, it arrived slowly, the feeling, the way his most important feelings always did, something that was not quite grief and not quite homecoming but was made of elements of both, the specific emotional compound of recognizing something you have never seen before. He went inside. The house had been maintained in the minimal sense, no rot, no structural damage, the basic systems functioning. But it had the particular stillness of a place that has been empty for a long time, where the air holds the absence of the people who used to move through it. Harry went from room to room without hurrying, taking the house in with the same careful attention he gave to everything, opening curtains as he went, letting the August light in. The kitchen was large and practical and had a window over the sink that looked out onto the back garden. Harry stood at it for a moment. The library on the second floor was not as large as the Greengrass Library but was personal in a way the Greengrass Library, for all its quality, wasn't. The books were arranged by the interests of the people who'd bought them, not by category, and the margins of the ones Harry pulled from the shelves were annotated in the two handwritings he now recognized on sight. His father's, slanted and energetic. His mother's, smaller and precise. He stayed in the library for an hour. He was sitting on the floor reading a book his mother had apparently considered important enough to annotate extensively when he heard the flu in the sitting room downstairs, and then Ragnarok's voice saying something efficient, and then the sound of footsteps that were not Ragnarok's. Multiple sets of footsteps. Harry put the book carefully back in its place, got up, and went downstairs. He had invited them all. The letters had gone out the previous week, carefully worded, "I'm going to Potter Manor for the first time. I'd like you to come, if you want to. Not for any reason. Just to see it." He hadn't been certain they would come. He'd been careful about the phrasing specifically because he didn't want anyone to feel obligated. He wanted the people who came to be there because they wanted to, not because the alliance required it. They were all there. Neville was in the doorway to the sitting room looking around with the particular quality of a person who is moved by a place and isn't hiding it well. Susan was in the kitchen already, which was entirely in character, standing at the window looking out at the back garden. Hannah was doing what she did in any new space, which was moving through it briskly and absorbing it and occasionally touching things with the straightforward affection of someone who related to the physical world tactily. Daphne was standing in the center of the entrance hall looking up at the staircase with her hands clasped behind her back and the expression she wore when she was processing something that had arrived at a level deeper than analysis. Astoria, who had apparently been included by virtue of being attached to Daphne and impossible to leave behind, was sitting on the bottom stair with the grimoire open on her lap, which Harry was fairly sure he hadn't left on the stair, which meant she'd found it somewhere and simply opened it and started reading. Augusta Longbottom was in the sitting room examining a portrait. Amelia Bones was in the kitchen with Susan, talking quietly. Helena Abbott was in the garden with her husband, visible through the kitchen window, apparently finding the neglected garden personally interesting. Ragnarok was standing in the hallway looking at the overall scene with the expression of a goblin who has seen a great many things and has a professional appreciation for when several things are going well simultaneously. Harry stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at all of them, in his house, and didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't anything immediately necessary to say. Astoria looked up from the grimoire. "There's a note in here that says, Lily was right again. That happens a lot." "She was usually right," Harry said. "Did your dad say that?" "In several places." Astoria nodded, satisfied. "I'm reading the funny parts." She went back to the book. Neville came across the hall. "It's a good house," he said quietly. "I know," Harry said. "I just realized that." Susan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Harry, there are things in the garden that have been growing for 11 years with no care that are, come and look, because I think some of them are magical and I don't know enough herbology to identify them, but Neville should definitely." Neville was already moving toward the kitchen, with the focused momentum of someone who has received a professional summons. Hannah came down the stairs, she'd apparently gone up without anyone noticing, and sat on the step above Astoria. "The library is brilliant," she said. "Your mum had the same taste in fiction as my mum. That's statistically interesting." "Or they knew each other," Harry said. Hannah blinked. "Did they?" "I don't actually know yet," Harry said. "But it's worth finding out." Daphne had turned from the staircase and was looking at Harry with the expression he was increasingly associating with her actual face, the one underneath the composure, clear-eyed and direct and genuinely present. "How does it feel?" she said. "Being here." Harry looked at the entrance hall. The morning light was coming through the open door, catching the dust in the air that their arrival had stirred up after 11 years of stillness, and the portraits on the walls were watching with the quiet attention of painted people in a house that had been waiting for the right people to return. "Like something that was supposed to happen," Harry said. Daphne nodded. Like she'd expected that answer. "Good," she said. "That's the right answer." "How is it the right answer?" "Because you could have said it felt like grief, or it felt like pressure, or it felt like responsibility. All of those would have been understandable." She looked at him steadily. "But the right answer for someone building something rather than inheriting something is that it feels like arrival. Which is what you said." A pause. "Your father would have said the same thing." Harry looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because he chose it," Daphne said. "He chose this house and this family and these alliances, and people who make real choices rather than default ones always feel the weight of them as rightness rather than obligation. It's the difference between a burden and a foundation." She turned back toward the library staircase. "I'm going to read the annotated sections before lunch." "I assume there is lunch." "There will be," Harry said. He looked at Ragnarok. "Is there anything in the pantry?" "There is now," Ragnarok said, which explained the extra time the goblin had taken in the kitchen before everyone else arrived. They ate lunch in the Potter kitchen around a table that seated 8, which felt designed for exactly this. The adults drifted in from their various explorations of the house and garden, and the children were already seated when they arrived, and what happened around that table in the Somerset afternoon was the kind of meal that became a fixed point in memory, the kind you came back to later, in harder times, and used to remember what good felt like. Augusta and Cyrus Greengrass, who had been circling each other with diplomatic caution since the Greengrass duel meeting, discovered a shared opinion about ministry competence that was so comprehensively negative and precisely articulated that they spent 20 minutes completing each other's sentences while Amelia listened with the expression of someone who agreed with everything and was professionally unable to say so. Helena Abbott told a story about a magical plant in the back garden that had apparently mistaken her husband for soil and attempted to root into his boot, which Neville found both scientifically fascinating and extremely funny. Her husband, from whom Harry had still not heard more than a dozen words total, produced the best laugh at his own expense that Harry had heard in a year. Astoria informed the table at large that she had read the funny annotations and they were very funny, and also that she had found a drawing of a duck in the margin of chapter 4 that she believed Harry's father had drawn during a boring meeting, which made Augusta Longbottom say, that sounds exactly like James, in the tone of someone speaking from direct personal experience, which led to a 20-minute conversation about James and Lily Potter that was the best thing Harry had heard since. He'd entered the magical world because it was just, people who had known them, talking about them, as they had actually been. Not legends. People. Harry sat in the middle of it and listened and ate and said almost nothing for a long time, and no one pushed him to talk, because they had all, in their different ways, understood that this was what he needed right now. Daphne, on his left, refilled his glass of pumpkin juice without comment when it was empty. He noticed and didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and it was one of the small precise things that accumulated over the course of the meal into something that didn't have a single name but was unmistakably real. After lunch, when the adults had migrated to the sitting room and Neville and Susan and Hannah were in the garden arguing cheerfully about the plant that had tried to eat Mr. Abbott's boot, Harry found himself in the entrance hall with Daphne again, both of them looking up at the staircase. "The formal dinner," Daphne said. "Before the letters come. We should do it properly." Harry turned to look at her. "You know what I mean," she said. "A proper formal dinner. All 5 houses, the heads of family, filed with Gringotts as an official alliance meeting. The first formal assembly of what your father planned." She looked at him. "Before Hogwarts. Before the letters come and everything becomes about Hogwarts and the sorting and what house everyone is in and who's supposed to be friends with whom. Do it now, when it's still ours." Harry thought about it. It had been in the back of his mind for weeks, the shape of a gathering that was formal enough to matter, personal enough to be real. "Here," he said. "Yes," Daphne said. "Here." 2 weeks, Harry said. "Before the Wisengamot session. Give people something to point to." Daphne nodded. "I'll draft the formal invitation language. You should sign them." "We both sign them," Harry said. She looked at him. The line appeared between her brows, and then smoothed. "Both of us," she agreed. The next 2 weeks moved at a speed that Harry's life had not previously managed. The Wisengamot session preparation required daily correspondence with Ragnarok, who was navigating a ministry that had stopped being obstructive and started being, in Ragnarok's precise word, frantic. The subcommittee that had been convened to bury the petition had been quietly dissolved when the vote demand was filed, which meant someone in the ministry had understood that the subcommittee's existence was now a liability rather than an asset. The cover-up evidence Harry had sent to Tiberius Ogden was apparently circulating more widely than anyone had planned, which was causing what Ragnarok described as productive disruption in the administrative ranks. 3 more Wisengamot members filed neutral position statements, which was not a yes vote but meant they weren't committing to opposition. Ragnarok said this was better than expected. Cornelius Fudge appeared in the back garden at Privet Drive a second time, which Harry was becoming almost accustomed to. This time Fudge had abandoned the clipboard and the authority posture and approached with the specific energy of someone trying to find a comfortable arrangement before the furniture was rearranged around them. "The minister wants to be helpful," Fudge said. "He is very aware of the Potter family's place in our world. He wants you to know that the ministry's position on the petition is evolving." Harry said. Fudge blinked. "I was going to say supportive." "You were going to say supportive after 3 attempts to delay, bury, and administratively dissolve the petition," Harry said pleasantly. "That's a significant evolution. I appreciate the minister's change of position." Fudge's expression cycled through several reactions rapidly before settling on something that was trying to be dignified. "The minister wants to meet you. Before the session." "I'll be at the session," Harry said. "Ragnarok will represent the Potter seat, as always. If the minister wants to discuss the petition before the session, he's welcome to submit his position through the formal channels, and Ragnarok will respond." "He'd like a personal meeting, I know what he'd like," Harry said. "He'd like to look me in the eye and figure out what I want so he can decide how much of it to offer in exchange for making this easier for him." He looked at Fudge steadily. "What I want is a fair hearing for my godfather. There's nothing to negotiate. The process runs, the evidence is presented, the Wisengamot decides. That's what it's there for. Fudge stood in the garden for a moment. You're 8 years old, he said, not accusingly, but with the dazed quality of someone who keeps returning to this fact in hopes that it will eventually explain something. Yes, Harry agreed. Goodbye, Mr. Fudge. Fudge left. The formal dinner invitations went out a week before the session, signed by Harry Potter and Daphne Greengrass jointly, on Potter Manor letterhead that Ragnarok had apparently kept filed for exactly such an occasion, written in the formal invitation language Daphne had drafted, and Harry had made 2 small revisions to that Daphne acknowledged were improvements with the particular brevity of someone for whom acknowledgement was significant. All 5 families confirmed within 24 hours. The preparations for the manor involved 3 days of careful work. Harry went up 2 days before with Ragnarok and the Gringotts estate management team, who restored the main dining room, polished the good silver, reactivated the household warmth-keeping charms, and dealt with 11 years of accumulated minor magical maintenance issues with the business-like efficiency of professionals who did this regularly and found sentiment neither useful nor obstructive. Harry walked the house while they worked. He went through the rooms slowly, the way he'd gone through them the first time, except now there were more impressions layered over the initial ones, the memory of Neville's face at the entrance, Susan in the kitchen, Astoria on the bottom stair. The house was absorbing them, he thought. Adding them to what it held. He spent an hour in the library, not reading, just being there. He looked at the annotations in the margins of his parents' books and thought about the portrait in the vault, 2 people laughing at something off camera, and the dinner was 3 days away and the Wisengamot session was 4 days after that, and somewhere in the middle of this he was supposed to receive a Hogwarts letter, which felt, after everything, almost comic in its ordinariness. He pulled a book from the shelf. His mother's handwriting in the margins. The annotation at the top of Chapter 3 of a theoretical text on advanced protective magic. Jay disagrees with the foundational premise here, but he's wrong, and I've told him so, and he agreed I was right but wrote, I disagree, in the margin anyway because he can't help himself. Below it, in his father's handwriting, I disagree. She's right. Harry sat down on the library floor and laughed. The night before the dinner, he couldn't sleep again, but this time it was different from the night before the duel. The duel had been anticipatory, all forward-facing energy. This was something quieter. He lay in the cupboard and thought about Sirius Black, who still didn't know any of this was happening, who was in a cell that was probably cold, and thought about what it would mean to that man to find out that an 8-year-old boy had spent the summer of his 8th year building a legal case out of a legacy vault and a goblin solicitor and 5 old families and a direct letter to an elderly relative who had been waiting 11 years for someone to ask him a direct question. He thought about the dinner tomorrow and the session next week and the letters that would come after, the Hogwarts letters that would arrive for all of them and transform everything into the ordinary rhythms of term time and schoolwork and the social geography of houses and common rooms. He was not worried about Hogwarts. He was not worried about being sorted or finding his way around or any of the things that might reasonably worry a child entering a new school. He was thinking about the Hogwarts that would receive him, a school designed around a version of Harry Potter that was a parentless child living with Muggle relatives, traumatized and unformed, waiting to be shaped. He thought about Dumbledore's face in the alley on Wyvern Lane, recalibrating. He was not angry at Dumbledore. He was not afraid of him. He simply understood that the school was part of a structure built around a series of assumptions about who he was, and that structure was going to need adjusting, and that adjusting it was going to require the same approach he'd taken to everything else this summer, patience, clarity, and the willingness to be exactly himself. He fell asleep thinking about the grimoire's foundational principle. The magic responds to intent. Everything else is scaffolding. The dinner happened on a Tuesday evening in late August, with the Somerset sky performing an appropriately dramatic sunset that turned the manor windows amber and sent long shadows across the dining room floor. All 5 families arrived within 10 minutes of each other, which meant they had probably coordinated, and Harry found this quietly satisfying, not that they had coordinated, but that they had wanted to arrive together, that this felt to them like the kind of occasion you marked as a group. The dining room held them all comfortably. The table was long and candlelit and the good silver was out and the food was, Ragnarok had organized it with the thoroughness he brought to everything, which meant it was excellent, and Harry did not ask how it had been arranged because some questions were less important than their answers. Harry sat at the head of the table. This had not been discussed. It was simply where everyone looked when they came in, and when Harry arrived last, a deliberately chosen last, to be in the room when everyone else was already there, and walked to that chair and sat down, it felt not like a claim but like a fact, something that had been true before anyone named it. Augusta was on his right, which also had not been discussed. Daphne was on his left, which she had clearly decided in advance. Ragnar sat at the far end of the table, which was unusual, a goblin at a formal wizard family dinner, and no one raised an objection, because the objection would have required someone to look at the assembled company and make the argument that the goblin who had spent the summer doing more work for this alliance than anyone else present should eat somewhere else, and no one wanted to be the person who made that argument. Astoria was not supposed to be at the formal dinner. She was there anyway. Daphne gave her one look and made a slight controlled hand gesture that meant sit down and don't cause problems, and Astoria sat next to Neville, who was clearly delighted, and did not cause any problems. The first part of the dinner was formal. Toasts were made. Augusta proposed one that was exactly the right length and said exactly the right things about legacy and intention and the responsibility of the living to the plans of the careful dead, and it landed in the room with the weight of something true. Cyrus Greengrass proposed a second that was brief and precise and surprisingly warm. Amelia, unexpectedly, proposed a third that was not formal at all. She simply said, looking down the table at Harry, to James and Lily Potter, who planned this and never got to see it, and everyone was quiet for a moment in the specific way that acknowledged something that was both painful and right. Harry raised his glass. The second part of the dinner was not formal at all. It was just dinner, with the noise and movement and cross-current of conversation that happens when a group of people have become enough of a thing together that the formality falls away naturally, and what's underneath is easy and real. The children's end of the table was particularly loud. Neville and Astoria had a genuine disagreement about whether magical plants were aware of time, which drew in Susan on one side and Hannah on the other, and Daphne occasionally intervened with a precise point that temporarily settled the debate before it reconstituted itself along a new line. Harry ate and listened and contributed and felt the thing that had been building all summer settle around the table like warmth around a fire. Near the end of the meal, Augusta said to him quietly, under the ambient noise of the table, "The session is in 4 days." "I know," Harry said. "Ragnar's brief is excellent. The votes are solid. The ministry will attempt to complicate the proceeding, but they don't have grounds to do so." She looked at him steadily. "It is going to succeed, Mr. Potter." Harry said, "Harry." Augusta's mouth did the thing it did when she was being moved by something and exercising considerable control over whether she showed it. "Harry," she said. "It is going to succeed. And then he needs people around him when he gets out," Harry said. He'll need time. And help. "He will have it," Augusta said, with the finality of the Longbottom family's word being given, which Harry had come to understand was a very serious thing. Down the table, Neville caught Harry's eye and gave him the simple, clear look that had become one of Harry's fixed points over the summer, the look that said, "I'm here, what do you need?" Harry gave him a brief nod back. At the far end of the table, Ragnar was eating with the precise efficiency of a goblin and watching the assembled company with the bronze eyes that saw everything and forgot nothing, and there was something in his expression, not warmth, not sentiment, but the professional appreciation of someone watching a well-designed structure come together. That was the highest compliment he knew how to pay. The Hogwarts letters arrived on Saturday. They came by owl, which was normal, except that they came in a group, 6 owls arriving within an hour of each other, landing on various windowsills at various addresses across England and Scotland and delivering their identical cream-colored envelopes with the purple seal. Harry's landed on the kitchen table at Privet Drive while he was eating breakfast. Petunia, in the kitchen when it arrived, went very still, the way she sometimes went still when she couldn't predict what she felt about something. Harry opened it. "Read it. Set it down." "Hogwarts," he said. Petunia turned back to the counter. "I know. I'll need, the supplies list is long." He scanned the second page. Most of it can come from Diagon Alley. The Muggle components I'll sort before I go. I'll take you to the shops, Petunia said, in the flat, certain tone she used for things she had already decided. For what you need that's normal. Harry looked at her back. Aunt Petunia. Don't, she said. I was going to say thank you. A pause. She turned around. She was holding the tea towel in both hands with a grip that was slightly too tight and looking at him with the expression that was older and more complicated than her usual ones. Your mother left for that school, she said. She left and she came back different. Which isn't, I don't mean, she stopped. Started again, with visible effort. She was still Lily. But she was more herself. Which is a strange thing to say, but it's what happened. She looked at him. I expect you will be the same. Harry thought about this. I'm already more myself than I was in June, he said. I know, Petunia said. I've been watching. They looked at each other across the kitchen. You're right, Petunia said. Not a question. Not quite a request. Something in between, in the register of something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. Yes, Harry said. Simply. Directly. The way you answered a question that had a simple and direct answer. Petunia nodded. Turned back to the counter. The conversation was over, in the way her conversations were always over, a door that opened briefly and then closed, not unkindly, but firmly. Harry picked up the Hogwarts letter and looked at the supply list. He needed a cauldron, standard size too. He needed robes. He needed books, which he was genuinely looking forward to. He needed a wand, officially, though the Hollyann Phoenix Feather wand was already in his room and had been for 2 months, and the official trip to Ollivanders would simply confirm what had already happened. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his satchel, next to the grimoire. Platform 9 3/4 on the 1st of September was everything the last 3 months had prepared him for and everything he couldn't have been prepared for at all. It was enormous and loud and full of magic used casually, without ceremony, trunks being levitated, owls complaining, families saying goodbye in the compressed, urgent way of people who have too many things to say and not enough time to say them. Steam from the Hogwarts Express moved across the platform in slow drifts, and the scarlet engine at the end of it was the kind of thing that declared its own importance without needing to say a word. Harry arrived with his trunk, new, good quality, bought with Vault 687 funds and clearly a Potter rather than a Desley purchase, and the satchel over his shoulder and the wand in his pocket and the grimoire, which he had wrestled with himself about and decided to bring because it was his and it went where he went. He found his people within 10 minutes. Neville was easy to find. He was the one with the plant in a pot balanced on top of his trunk, having a quiet argument with Augusta about whether it was a practical thing to bring to school, which Neville was winning by attrition. Susan arrived next, with Amelia, who spotted Harry and gave him the brief, assessing nod that was her version of warmth and felt like a great deal coming from her. Hannah came in at a near run, her mother waving cheerfully from the barrier, and immediately attached herself to the group with the ease of someone who has never questioned her right to be somewhere. Daphne arrived last, which Harry suspected was deliberate, because Daphne understood timing. She came with Astoria and her father, Cyrus, who shook Harry's hand with the grip that had shed all its caution and become simply direct, and Astoria, who immediately told Harry she had finished the funny annotations and was starting on the complex theoretical sections because she had decided to take Hogwarts very seriously. You're 5, Daphne said. The letters come at 11, Astoria said. That's 6 more years. I'm being proactive. Harry crouched down to Astoria's level. I'll send you notes, he said. When I find things you should read. Astoria looked at him with the wide, dark eyes. Promise? Promise, Harry said. She threw her arms around his neck with the unself-conscious force of a small child expressing an emotion at full volume, which Harry received with a kind of startled warmth that took him a moment to settle into and then felt entirely natural. Daphne, watching this, said nothing. The line was between her brows. And then it wasn't. The train whistle sounded. Harry stood up. He looked at his people, Neville with his plant, Susan steady and warm, Hannah already asking Neville something about the plant with the energetic curiosity she brought to everything, Daphne collected and present and real. Augusta was watching him from the barrier. She gave him a single nod, the kind that said everything and needed to say nothing more. Amelia Bones caught his eye and said, Ragnarok will owl you the session results within 24 hours of the hearing. Then, after a pause, in a quieter voice, I think it's going to go the way you need it to go. Thank you, Harry said. And then, because she was Amelia Bones and she deserved honesty, for everything this summer. Not just the vote. She looked at him for a moment. Your mother was something special, she said. Your father too. I think, she stopped herself. Started again. I think this summer would have made them very proud. Harry held that carefully, the way he held all the best things, not tightly enough to crush it, not loosely enough to drop it. I hope so, he said. The whistle again, longer. They found a compartment, the 5 of them, which was right, and settled in with trunks and owl cages and Neville's plant, which turned out to fit precisely on the overhead rack if you were creative about it, which Neville was. The platform moved past the windows as the train pulled out, and the families at the barrier receded, and then they were in the open English countryside, green and bright under the September sky. Harry sat with his satchel on his lap and looked out the window. All right? Susan asked. Yes, he said, and meant it completely. The sorting's going to be interesting, Hannah said. I've been thinking about it. Like, given everything, where do you think, Gryffindor, Neville said, with the certainty of someone who has considered this carefully. Obviously, Daphne said. Then, after a beat, unfortunately. Harry turned from the window. Why unfortunately? Because you'll be in Gryffindor and I'll be in Slytherin and we'll spend the next 7 years listening to other people's opinions about what that means. She said it with the precision of someone who has already worked out the problem and its attendant frustrations and is mildly resigned to them. It's tedious. We already know what it means, Harry said. We've known each other since August. Daphne looked at him. The clear, direct, present look. Yes, she said. Exactly. The train moved north, and the countryside opened up around it, and in a first-year compartment on the Hogwarts Express, 5 children sat together with the weight of a summer's worth of building behind them, heading toward a school that thought it knew what to expect. It didn't. But that was all right. Harry had learned something important this summer, something his father had tried to write down in a vault 30 feet underground: the magic responds to intent. Everything else is scaffolding. He knew what he intended. He opened the grimoire. 3 days after the train left King's Cross, a notification from Ragnarok arrived at Hogwarts by Gringotts Owl. Harry read it in the Great Hall at breakfast, ignoring the looks it generated. A certified Gringotts bird delivering a formal document to a first year on the 3rd day of term was the kind of event that got noticed. He didn't mind. He read it once, folded it, and passed it across the table to Neville. Neville read it. His face did the thing it did, surprised and then moved and then simply glad. He passed it to Susan, who read it and put it down and pressed her lips together for a moment and then smiled the warm, genuine Susan Bones smile. It went down the table to Hannah, who read it and said, "Oh," quietly, in the voice of someone who means a great deal more than the word suggests. And then a 4th-year Slytherin passed it along the interhouse delivery line to Daphne Greengrass, who read it at the Slytherin table with the complete composure of someone who had known this was coming, and whose expression did not change at all except for the very slight softening around the eyes that Harry had learned was the most Daphne would ever publicly show. The notification said, "The Wizengamot full session has reviewed the case of Sirius Orain Black. By a vote of 9 to 4, with 3 abstentions, the Wizengamot has found that the original imprisonment was conducted in violation of 3 foundational statutes and is hereby declared procedurally void. Mr. Black will be released from Azkaban pending a formal hearing, at which the evidence will be presented in full. A Veritaserum examination has been scheduled. The Potter family's petition is commended for its procedural thoroughness. Wisengamot Office of Records. Harry put the folded document in his satchel, next to the grimoire. He ate his breakfast. Around him, Hogwarts went about its morning with the ordinary commotion of a school that didn't know yet that the boy sitting at the Gryffindor table had spent his summer building something in the quiet spaces between everything else, something patient and deliberate and real, built on 5 names written in his father's hand and an owl that wouldn't leave, and the foundational principle that magic, real magic, responds to what you mean. Harry Potter knew what he meant. He was just getting started.